Welcome to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean, and here every whisper hides a mystery. These Miss Marple stories are my own creations, written just for you. So lean in and let the clues begin. In the frost-bitten heart of winter, Miss Jane Marple arrives at Silvermere Manor, summoned by a cryptic plea from her friend Lady Beatrice. A stolen emerald brooch, eerie footprints vanishing on a frozen lake, and a web of family secrets unravel as Jane's keen eye pierces through deception. Was it Lionel's cunning theft, Clara's hidden truth, or something darker lurking by Silvermere Lake? In this chilling tale of stilts and suspicion, one truth emerges. No secret escapes Miss Marple's gaze. Chapter 1. The Arrival at Silvermere. The train rattled through the winter dusk, its wheels grinding against the frost-kissed rails as it approached the sleepy station of St. Mary's Hollow. Miss Jane Marple, bundled in a sensible wool coat and her favourite knitted scarf, a gift from her nephew Raymond, peered through the window at the snow-draped countryside. The fields lay hushed under a fresh blanket of white, and Silvermere Lake, barely visible in the fading light, gleamed like a sheet of polished glass. She adjusted her hat, a practical affair with a single feather, and gathered her small valise, ready to disembark. The invitation to Silvermere Manor had come unexpectedly, penned in the elegant but hurried hand of Lady Beatrice Haverford, an old-school friend whose warmth had always outshone her occasional lapses in judgment. "My dear Jane," the letter had read, "I find myself in need of your quiet wisdom. Things are not right at Silvermere, and I fear it's more than my nerves." The vagueness was deliberate, Miss Marple knew. Beatrice was not one to commit her fears to paper. Yet the undercurrent of unease had been enough to draw Miss Marple from the cosy confines of St. Mary Mead. As the train hissed to a stop, Miss Marple stepped onto the platform, her breath forming delicate clouds in the frigid air. The station was little more than a shed, its single lamp casting a feeble glow. A young porter, his cap dusted with snow, hurried to assist, but Miss Marple waved him off with a kind smile, her sharp eyes already scanning the scene. A horse-drawn sleigh waited nearby, its driver muffled in a greatcoat. "For Silvermere Manor, miss," he called, his voice rough but respectful. She nodded, and soon the sleigh glided through the village, past thatched cottages glowing with firelight, toward the manor's imposing silhouette. Silvermere Manor stood at the edge of the lake, its Georgian facade all symmetry and dignity, though the snow clinging to its cornices gave it a slightly forlorn air. Ivy, brittle with frost, clung to the stonework, and the tall windows seemed to watch the approaching sleigh with guarded curiosity. As Miss Marple alighted, the great oak door swung open, and Lady Beatrice emerged, her silver hair catching the light of a lantern held by a maid. "Jane, you've come!" Beatrice exclaimed, her voice warm but tinged with strain. She clasped Miss Marple's hands, her grip a touch too tight. "You're a godsend in this wretched cold." The hall was a grand affair, with polished floors and a chandelier that glittered despite the gloom. A fire roared in the hearth, casting shadows on portraits of stern Haverford's past. Beatrice led Miss Marple to a drawing-room where tea was promptly served, the porcelain cups clinking softly. "It's the family, Jane," Beatrice said, lowering her voice as the maid withdrew. "There's a tension I can't place. Lionel, my nephew, is restless. He's always been ambitious, but lately he's secretive. And Clara, his fiancée, seems so withdrawn. Even Reginald, my cousin, is more irascible than usual." She paused, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. and there's something about the lake. It feels wrong." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mild expression masking the quick workings of her mind. She knew Beatrice's tendency to dramatize, but the mention of the lake intrigued her. "The lake, Beatrice? Has something happened there?" Beatrice hesitated, then shook her head. "Not exactly, just a feeling, but you'll see for yourself tomorrow. The snow makes everything so quiet, yet it hides things, doesn't it?" Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to village scandals back home, where secrets often lay buried beneath innocent facades. As they spoke, the door creaked, and a young man entered. Lionel Haverford, Miss Marple presumed. He was handsome, with dark hair and a disarming smile, but his eyes held a flicker of calculation. "Aunt Beatrice, you didn't tell me we had a guest," he said, his tone light but his glance appraising. Beatrice introduced Miss Marple, and Lionel bowed, his charm polished yet somehow practiced. "A pleasure, Miss Marple. I hope you'll find Silvermere to your liking, despite the chill." His words were courteous, but Miss Marple caught the brief tightening of his jaw, as if her presence was an unexpected complication. The conversation turned to trivialities, the weather, the state of the roads, but Miss Marple's attention wandered to the room's details. The heavy drapes, the faint scent of lavender polish, the distant creak of the manor settling under the snow's weight. Beatrice's unease, Lionel's guarded charm, and the looming presence of Silvermere Lake formed a pattern, faint but discernible, like the first stitches of a complex embroidery. As she retired to her room that night, the wind howling softly outside, Miss Marple knew that St. Mary's Hollow held a mystery, and she was determined to unravel it. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Brooch. The dining room at Silvermere Manor was a study in faded opulence, its long mahogany table gleaming under the soft glow of a chandelier that had witnessed generations of Haverford feasts and feuds. The walls, papered in a deep burgundy, bore the weight of ancestral portraits, their eyes seeming to follow the flickering candlelight. Miss Jane Marple, seated to the right of Lady Beatrice Haverford, observed the scene with her usual quiet attentiveness, her small, sessile, bird-like hands folded neatly in her lap. The snow outside fell steadily, muffling the world beyond the tall windows, and the air inside carried the faint tang of wood smoke and beeswax polish. The table was set for 5, a modest gathering for such a grand room. Beatrice at the head wore a velvet gown of midnight blue, her silver hair pinned elegantly, though her fingers betrayed a nervous flutter as she adjusted her napkin. To her left sat Lionel Haverford, her nephew, whose easy charm was tempered tonight by a certain restlessness. His dark eyes darted about, as if seeking something beyond the room's confines. Opposite him was Clara Thornton, his fiancée, a slender young woman with delicate features and auburn hair swept into a simple chignon. Her hands, pale and expressive, toyed with a silver fork, and her gaze remained fixed on her plate, as though unwilling to meet the scrutiny of others. Major Reginald Haverford, Beatrice's cousin, occupied the foot of the table, his broad shoulders and ruddy complexion suggesting a life of outdoor vigour, now confined to grumbling discontent. The 5th place was empty, reserved for Mrs. Tuttle, the housekeeper, who had declined to dine, but hovered near the door, her starched apron crisp as she supervised the serving maid. The meal began with a consommé, its delicate aroma doing little to ease the undercurrent of tension. Beatrice attempted to steer the conversation toward pleasantries, remarking on the beauty of the snowfall and the prospect of a quiet Christmas. "It's been years since we've had such a blanket of snow," she said, her voice bright but strained. "It makes Silvermere feel like a world apart, doesn't it?" Lionel flashed a smile, his teeth catching the candlelight. "A world apart, perhaps, but a dashed cold one, Aunt Beatrice. I'd trade this snow for a week in Monte Carlo any day." His tone was light, but Miss Marple noted the edge beneath it, a hint of impatience that suggested more than mere dislike of the weather. Clara glanced up briefly, her green eyes catching Lionel's for a moment before returning to her soup. "The lake looks magical in the snow," she murmured, almost to herself, like something from a painting. Her voice was soft with a trace of a northern accent, and Miss Marple wondered at the wistfulness in it. An artist, Beatrice had mentioned earlier, with a talent for capturing landscapes. Did Clara see beauty in the lake, or something else? Major Reginald snorted, his moustache quivering. "Magical, my foot! That lake's a menace in winter. Froze solid last year, and nearly took young Tompkins when he tried skating on it. Foolish boy!" He attacked his soup with vigour, as if the memory required immediate action. Miss Marple, sipping her own broth, noted his bluster, but also the way his eyes flicked toward Lionel. A mixture of disapproval and suspicion. The conversation limped along, touching on village gossip and the state of the manor's gardens, until the main course, roast pheasant with chestnut stuffing, was served. It was then that Beatrice, reaching for her glass, gave a sudden gasp, her hand flying to her shawl. The delicate silk, pinned at her shoulder, hung loose, and the space where a brooch should have gleamed was conspicuously bare. "My emerald!" she exclaimed, her voice sharp with distress. "It's gone!" The room fell silent, save for the faint crackle of the fire. Lionel leaned forward, his brow furrowing in concern that seemed, to Miss Marple's keen eye, a touch too rehearsed. "Gone, Aunt Beatrice? Are you certain you wore it tonight?" His voice was solicitous, but his fingers tapped a rapid rhythm on the tablecloth. Beatrice's hands fluttered to her throat, then back to the shawl. "I'm quite certain, Lionel. I pinned it on this afternoon when I walked by the lake. It was there, I know it was. Oh, this is dreadful." Her eyes, wide with alarm, darted to each face at the table, as if seeking an explanation in their expressions. Clara's fork clattered softly against her plate, and she flushed, murmuring an apology. "Could it have fallen off during your walk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The snow might have covered it." "Nonsense," Reginald barked, pushing back his chair with a scrape. "That brooch is worth a king's ransom. If it's lost, someone's got sticky fingers, mark my words." His gaze settled on Lionel, heavy with implication, and Miss Marple noted the younger man's jaw tighten, though he said nothing. Mrs. Tuttle, who had been lingering near the sideboard, stepped forward, her face a mask of concern. "Shall I have the staff search the house, my lady?" It may have slipped off in the drawing-room or the hall. Her tone was deferential, but Miss Marple caught the quick glance she cast toward Lionel, as if gauging his reaction. Beatrice nodded, her composure fraying. "Yes, please, Mrs. Tuttle. And the grounds too, though I fear the snow will make it impossible." "Oh, Jane," she turned to Miss Marple, her voice trembling. "That brooch was my mother's, passed down through 3 generations. It's not just the value, it's the sentiment." Miss Marple patted her friend's hand, her expression one of gentle sympathy, though her mind was already at work. There, Beatrice, we shall find it, I'm sure. Things have a way of turning up when one looks properly." Her words were soothing, but her eyes, bright and sharp, were scanning the room, noting every detail. The way Lionel's hand lingered near his wine-glass, the faint tremor in Clara's fingers, the belligerent set of Reginald's shoulders, and Mrs. Tuttle's quiet withdrawal to summon the staff. Dinner resumed, but the mood was irreparably altered. The pheasant grew cold, and conversation dwindled to awkward murmurs. Miss Marple, eating sparingly, let her thoughts drift to the brooch. An emerald, Beatrice had said, set in gold, large enough to be noticed, heavy enough to be felt. It was unlikely to have simply fallen off unnoticed, especially on a walk by the lake where Beatrice's heavy coat would have secured the shawl. No, this was no accident. The brooch had been taken, or at the very least, deliberately misplaced. As the meal ended and the party moved to the drawing-room for coffee, Miss Marple lingered at the table, her gaze settling on the window overlooking Silvermere Lake. The snow continued to fall soft and relentless, cloaking the world in silence. She recalled Beatrice's earlier words about the lake feeling wrong. Was it merely her friend's nerves, or did the lake hold the key to this mystery? The footprints Beatrice had mentioned in passing, her walk by the lake, suggested a starting point. Snow, Miss Marple knew, could conceal as much as it revealed, and she resolved to examine the grounds at first light. In the drawing-room, the atmosphere was no less strained. Lionel stood by the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a brandy glass. He spoke of the weather with forced cheer, but his eyes kept straying to Beatrice, who sat clutching her shawl as if it might still yield the missing brooch. Clara perched on a settee, sketching idly in a small notebook, her pencil moving with a nervous energy that Miss Marple found telling. Reginald paced near the bookshelves, muttering about carelessness and modern morals, his voice loud enough to ensure everyone heard. Mrs. Tuttle reappeared, her face impassive. The staff have searched the hall, the drawing-room, and my lady's bedroom, but there's no sign of the brooch. We'll check the rest of the house tonight, and the grounds tomorrow, if the snow allows. Beatrice thanked her, but her shoulders slumped, and Miss Marple sensed the weight of more than just a lost heirloom. As the evening drew to a close, Miss Marple excused herself, claiming fatigue from her journey. In truth, she wished to think undisturbed. Her room, a cosy chamber with a four-poster bed and a view of the lake, was warmed by a small fire. She sat by the window, her knitting in her lap, though her needles remained still. The lake, now a silver expanse under the moonlight, seemed to beckon, its frozen surface hiding secrets beneath its icy crust. She considered the players in this little drama. Lionel, with his charm and debts, had the most obvious motive. A valuable brooch could settle many a creditor's claim. Yet his openness, his almost theatrical concern, suggested either innocence or cunning. Clara, quiet and watchful, seemed caught in a web not entirely of her own making. Her love for Lionel might blind her, or perhaps she knew more than she let on. Reginald's bluster could mask guilt, though Miss Marple suspected his role was more that of an indignant bystander, quick to accuse but slow to act. And Mrs. Tuttle, with her sharp eyes and unobtrusive presence, was a figure to watch. Housekeepers, Miss Marple knew from experience, often saw more than they admitted. The brooch's disappearance was no mere mishap, of that she was certain. The lake, the snow, the family tensions, all pointed to a deliberate act, a puzzle designed to mislead. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to her village, St. Mary Mead, where small incidents, a missing silver spoon, a whispered rumour, often unravelled into larger truths. Here at Silvermere, the stakes were higher, the setting grander, but human nature, she knew, remained the same. As she prepared for bed, slipping into a flannel nightgown and brushing out her white hair, Miss Marple made a mental note to visit the lake at dawn. The footprints Beatrice had taken, the path she had walked, might hold clues not yet buried by the snow. And somewhere, perhaps in Lionel's guarded smile or Clara's hesitant glances, lay the thread that would unravel this mystery. With a final glance at the lake, its surface serene yet enigmatic, Miss Marple extinguished her lamp and settled into the darkness, her mind as alert as ever. Chapter 3. Footprints on the Ice. The morning broke over Silvermere Manor with a crisp, unrelenting clarity, the kind that only a winter dawn could muster. The snow had ceased falling some time in the night, leaving the world outside draped in a pristine white shroud, untouched save for the faint tracks of a fox near the garden hedge. Miss Jane Marple, awake before the household, stood at her bedroom window, her breath fogging the cold glass as she studied the expanse of Silvermere Lake. The frozen surface gleamed under the pale sun, its edges fringed with reeds that stood stiff and brittle in the frost. The lake, she sensed, was more than a scenic backdrop. It was a stage, and the drama played upon it had yet to reveal its full script. She dressed warmly, choosing a sturdy tweed skirt and her thickest cardigan, her knitted scarf wrapped snugly about her neck. Her small, practical boots were suited for the snow, and she tucked a pair of gloves into her coat pocket, anticipating a chill that went beyond the weather. Downstairs, the manor was quiet, the staff only just stirring to light fires and prepare breakfast. Miss Marple slipped out through a side door, avoiding the main hall where she might encounter an early riser. Her destination was the lake, and she wished to see it undisturbed. The path from the manor to the boathouse was a gentle slope, now blanketed in snow that crunched softly underfoot. The air was sharp, carrying the clean scent of ice and pine, and Miss Marple's cheeks tingled as she made her way toward the water's edge. The boathouse, a weathered structure of dark wood, stood sentinel at the lake's northern end, its roof sagging under the weight of accumulated snow. Beyond it, the lake stretched out, a vast frozen mirror reflecting the pale sky. Miss Marple paused, her eyes tracing the shoreline, noting the reeds that clustered in clumps, their tips bowing under frost. It was here, Beatrice had said, that she had walked the previous afternoon, her emerald brooch pinned to her shawl. As she approached the boathouse, Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a distinct trail of footprints in the snow, leading from the boathouse door across the frozen lake. The tracks were clear, deep impressions that suggested a purposeful stride, and they stretched out toward the center of the lake, where they stopped abruptly, as if the walker had simply vanished. She knelt, careful not to disturb the snow, and examined the prints. They were large, likely a man's, with a curious uniformity in their spacing, as though measured with care. There were no return tracks, no scuffs or signs of a struggle, and the ice beneath showed no cracks or weaknesses. "Most peculiar," she murmured, her breath forming a small cloud in the air. She straightened, her mind already weaving possibilities. Footprints that ended mid-lake suggested either a miracle or a deception, and Miss Marple, with her practical turn of mind, leaned firmly toward the latter. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a gardener had faked a theft by leaving misleading tracks in the mud, only to be undone by a single overlooked detail. Here, the snow and ice offered a different canvas, but the principle was the same. Someone had crafted a scene to perplex and mislead. Her attention shifted to the reeds near the boathouse, where a flash of colour caught her eye. Snagged on a brittle stalk was a scrap of scarlet fabric, its edges frayed, but the tear suspiciously clean, as if made with intent. Miss Marple retrieved it carefully, holding it up to the light. It was unmistakably a piece of a scarf, vibrant against the monochrome landscape. Clara's scarf, she recalled, had been mentioned in passing, a bright red accessory that stood out against her subdued demeanour. Had Clara been here? Or was this another piece of the puzzle, placed to divert suspicion? Before she could ponder further, the crunch of boots announced the arrival of others. Major Reginald Haverford, his face red from the cold and his moustache bristling, led a small search party from the manor. Behind him came Lionel, his heavy coat buttoned tightly, and Clara, bundled in a woolen cloak, her eyes downcast. Mrs. Tuttle followed, carrying a lantern despite the daylight, her expression one of quiet efficiency. Beatrice, wrapped in a fur-lined coat, brought up the rear, her face pale with worry. "Jane!" Beatrice called, hurrying forward. "You're up early. Have you found anything?" Her voice held a note of hope, but her eyes betrayed the strain of the previous night's loss. Miss Marple gestured to you. "The footprints. These are most curious, Beatrice. They begin at the boathouse and end out there in the middle of the lake, with no return path. Quite a conundrum, wouldn't you say?" Reginald strode forward, his boots sinking into the snow. "What's that? Footprints stopping dead? Preposterous!" He squinted at the tracks, his brow furrowing. "The ice is solid. I tested it myself last week. No one's fallen through, that's certain. So where the devil did they go?" Lionel, standing slightly apart, chuckled, though the sound lacked warmth. "Perhaps we've a ghost at Silvermere, Major. Some old Haverford ancestor wandering the lake." His tone was light, but Miss Marple noted the way his hand lingered in his coat pocket, as if reassuring himself of something hidden there. Clara, hovering near the reeds, gasped softly as she spotted the scarlet scrap. That's mine," she said, her voice trembling. "My scarf, I mean. But I wasn't here yesterday, I swear it. I was sketching in the conservatory all afternoon." Her eyes met Miss Marple's, wide with something akin to fear, and Miss Marple offered a reassuring nod, though her mind was already turning over the implications. "Nonsense, girl!" Reginald snapped, his voice booming across the quiet lake. "Your scarf's here, plain as day. Either you're lying, or someone's playing a trick. And I'd wager it's the latter, with all this tomfoolery about vanishing footprints." His gaze settled on Lionel, heavy with suspicion, and Miss Marple noted the younger man's fleeting smirk, quickly masked by a look of concern. Mrs. Tuttle, ever practical, stepped forward. "Shall I fetch the groundskeeper, my lady?" "He could bring a ladder to check the ice, though I doubt we'll find much under this snow." Her tone was deferential, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of her eyes toward the boathouse, as if she knew more than she let on. Beatrice, clutching her coat against the wind, shook her head. "No, Mrs. Tuttle, not yet. But please, everyone, look carefully. The brooch might be here, covered by the snow." Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple sensed the depth of her friend's distress, not just for the brooch, but for the harmony of her household, now fractured by suspicion. The group spread out, combing the snow near the boathouse and the reeds, though the fresh powder made the task daunting. Miss Marple, moving slowly, kept her eyes on the footprints, following their path to the edge of the ice. The lake was indeed solid, its surface unmarred save for the mysterious tracks. She recalled a winter in St. Mary Mead, when a frozen pond had played a role in a village scandal. A young man claiming to have crossed it, only to be revealed as a liar when the ice proved too thin. Here, the ice was thick, but the footprint's abrupt end suggested a different kind of trickery. She turned her attention to the boathouse, its door slightly ajar. Stepping inside, she found a dim, musty space filled with oars, fishing nets, and a small rowboat propped against the wall. The floor was dusted with snow, tracked in by recent visitors, but something else caught her eye. A faint scuff mark, long and narrow, as if something had been dragged across the boards. Stilts, perhaps, the thought flickered in her mind, sparked by a memory of a travelling circus that had once visited her village, where performers on stilts had delighted children with their lofty strides. Could such a device create the illusion of vanishing footprints? As she emerged, Lionel was nearby, ostensibly searching the snow, but with a distracted air. "Find anything, Miss Marple?" he asked, his smile a touch too bright. "Or are we chasing phantoms out here?" "Phantoms are rarely so obliging as to leave footprints," she replied mildly, her eyes meeting his. "But the truth, Mr. Haverford, has a way of leaving traces, don't you think?" His smile faltered, and he turned away, busying himself with a patch of snow. Clara, meanwhile, had drifted toward the reeds, her fingers brushing the scarlet scrap as if it might speak. Miss Marple joined her, noting the girl's pale face and the way her hands trembled. "You're certain you weren't here, my dear?" she asked gently, her tone inviting confidence rather than accusation. Clara nodded, her voice low. "I was in the conservatory sketching the snow on the roses. I only noticed my scarf was torn when I put it on this morning. I thought I'd caught it on a door, but now—" She trailed off, her eyes searching the lake as if it might offer answers. Miss Marple patted her arm, her mind cataloguing the girl's words. Clara's distress seemed genuine, but there was a hesitancy, a shadow of doubt that suggested she knew more than she admitted. Was she protecting someone, perhaps Lionel? Or was she herself a pawn in a larger game? The search yielded nothing, no brooch, no further clues beyond the footprints and the scarf. Reginald, growing impatient, declared the effort futile and stomped back toward the manor, muttering about wasted mornings. Beatrice, disheartened, followed, leaning on Mrs. Tuttle's arm. Lionel and Clara lingered, and Miss Marple noted the way they avoided each other's gaze, as if some unspoken tension held them apart. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple remained by the lake, her eyes on the footprints. The snow, she knew, was both ally and adversary, preserving evidence but also concealing it. The tracks were a deliberate act, designed to baffle and distract. Stilts, she mused, could explain the lack of return prints. Lifted above the snow, the walker could retreat without leaving a trace. But why go to such lengths? And how did the scarf fit into this carefully staged mystery? She thought of Lionel's restless energy, his guarded charm, and the debts Beatrice had mentioned. The brooch, valuable and portable, would be a temptation to a young man in financial straits. Yet the footprints suggested a plan more elaborate than simple theft, a performance perhaps to divert suspicion or create an alibi. Clara's scarf, too, was no accident. Its placement was too convenient, too calculated to be mere chance. As she made her way back to the manor, the wind picking up and scattering snowflakes across her path, Miss Marple's mind was alive with possibilities. The lake, the footprints, the scarf, the brooch, all were threads in a tapestry yet to be fully woven. She recalled a saying from her village, "Snow hides, but it also reveals." Somewhere in this frozen landscape lay the truth, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was determined to uncover it. Back at the manor, breakfast awaited, but Miss Marple's appetite was for answers. She would watch and listen, noting every glance, every word, every hesitation. The players in this drama, Lionel, Clara, Reginald, even Mrs. Tuttle, each held a piece of the puzzle. And as the snow continued to blanket Silvermere, Miss Marple knew that the key to the vanishing brooch, and perhaps to darker secrets, lay just beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. Chapter 4. The Family's Secrets. The morning's search by Silvermere Lake had left the household of Silvermere Manor subdued, as if the cold had seeped not only into their bones, but into their spirits. The great hall, with its high ceilings and ancestral tapestries, felt cavernous and unwelcoming. As Miss Jane Marple settled into a cushioned armchair by the drawing-room fire, a cup of tea balanced delicately on her knee. The flames cast a warm glow, but they did little to dispel the chill of suspicion that hung over the room. Lady Beatrice Haverford, seated across from her, stared into the fire, her fingers twisting the edge of her shawl, now bereft of its emerald brooch. The loss, Miss Marple sensed, was more than material. It had cracked open fault lines within the family, revealing tensions long buried beneath polite manners. The drawing-room was quiet, save for the occasional crackle of the logs and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen, where Mrs. Tuttle oversaw the staff's preparations for luncheon. Miss Marple, her knitting needles clicking softly, used the moment to reflect on the morning's discoveries. The perplexing footprints that ended mid-lake, the scarlet scrap of Clara's scarf caught in the reeds, and the subtle undercurrents of unease among the Haverfords. Each clue was a thread, and she was determined to weave them into a coherent pattern, much as she had done in St. Mary Mead when unravelling village intrigues. Beatrice broke the silence, her voice low and tremulous. "Jane, I can't help but feel this is more than a simple theft. The brooch, the lake, it's as if someone is playing a cruel game with us." Her eyes, usually bright with warmth, were clouded with worry, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in her hands, a sign of nerves stretched thin. "My dear Beatrice," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but firm, "people often reveal more than they intend, even in their games. We shall find your brooch, and perhaps a bit more besides." She paused, her eyes twinkling with that quiet perceptiveness that had so often disarmed her interlocutors. "Tell me about your family, Beatrice, not the pleasantries, but the truths, the things you've kept even from yourself." Beatrice hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window where snowflakes danced against the panes. "It's not a happy story, Jane. Silvermere has always been a place of pride, but pride can curdle into resentment. Lionel, my nephew, is the heir, you know. He's charming, clever, but he's always been restless. He tried his hand at a business venture in London, some scheme involving motor cars, but it failed, and now he's in debt. I've helped where I can, but I fear he's grown desperate. The brooch," she trailed off, her implication clear. Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing as she considered Lionel's demeanour. The easy smile that never quite reached his eyes, the restless energy that suggested a man cornered by circumstance. And Clara, his fiancée, she seems a quiet soul, but there's a sharpness to her, isn't there? Beatrice sighed, her fingers smoothing the shawl. Clara is an artist, sensitive and observant. She came to us a year ago, after Lionel met her at an exhibition in Bath. I thought her a good influence at first. She's so steady, so devoted to him. But lately, she's withdrawn, as if she's carrying a burden. I've wondered if Lionel's troubles have strained their engagement. She loves him, I'm sure, but love can blind one to faults. And Major Reginald, Miss Marple prompted, her voice mild but probing. She recalled the retired officer's bluster at the lake, his quickness to accuse Lionel, and the way his eyes had lingered on the manor as if it were his own. Beatrice's lips tightened. Reginald is my cousin, older by a decade, and he's never quite forgiven fate for making him a branch, rather than the trunk of the Haverford line. He believes he'd manage Silvermere better than I do, or Lionel will. He's loyal in his way, but his temper makes him difficult. He's been especially cross since Lionel's debts came to light, calls it a disgrace to the family name. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the soft click a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. Reginald's resentment, Lionel's desperation, Clara's reticence, each was a piece of the puzzle, but none yet explained the footprints or the scarf. "And Mrs. Tuttle?" she asked, almost as an afterthought. "She seems a capable woman, very much a part of the household." Beatrice smiled faintly. "Oh, Mrs. Tuttle is a treasure. She's been with us for 20 years, ever since my husband passed. She knows every nook of Silvermere, and I suspect she sees more than she says. But she's loyal to a fault, perhaps too loyal, if you take my meaning." Miss Marple did. In her experience, housekeepers were often the silent sentinels of a household, privy to secrets their employers barely acknowledged. Mrs. Tuttle's quiet efficiency, her quick glances at the lake, suggested she might hold a key to this mystery, whether she knew it or not. The door opened, admitting Clara, who entered with a hesitancy that spoke of unease. She wore a simple wool dress, its muted green a contrast to the vivid scarf now missing a piece. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I thought I might join you for a moment, Lady Beatrice. The house feels so heavy today." Beatrice gestured to a chair. "Not at all, my dear. Sit, please. Jane and I were just talking about the family." Her tone was kind, but Miss Marple noted the flicker of discomfort in Clara's eyes, as if she sensed the conversation's undercurrents. Clara settled into the chair, her hands folding tightly in her lap. "I suppose the brooch has everyone on edge," she said, her gaze fixed on the fire. "I keep thinking about the lake, how still it was this morning. It's hard to believe anything could be lost in all that snow." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of gentle curiosity. "You're fond of the lake, aren't you, Miss Thornton? You mentioned it looked like a painting. Do you often sketch there?" Clara's cheeks flushed slightly. "I do, when the light is right. It's peaceful, or it was until—" She paused, her fingers tightening. "Until this morning, with those footprints. They make no sense, do they? It's as if someone walked out and disappeared." "Disappearances are often less mysterious than they seem," Miss Marple said, her voice mild but pointed. "In my village, We once had a case where a man's tracks vanished in a field, only to be found hiding in a haystack. People can be very clever when they wish to mislead." Clara's eyes widened, but she said nothing, and Miss Marple noted the way her hands trembled before she tucked them beneath her shawl. The girl was nervous, perhaps protecting someone, or perhaps caught in a web she didn't fully understand. The door swung open again, this time with more force. As Major Reginald strode in, his face flushed from the cold or indignation. "Beatrice, this is intolerable," he bellowed, brandishing a newspaper as if it were a weapon. "The village is already buzzing about your brooch. They're saying it's cursed or some such rot. We'll have every busybody in St. Mary's Hollow poking about if we don't put a stop to this nonsense." Beatrice paled, her hand rising to her throat. "Cursed? Oh, Reginald, don't be absurd. It's a family heirloom, not some Gothic trinket. But the talk, it's distressing." Reginald snorted, tossing the newspaper onto a side table. "Distressing? It's a scandal, that's what it is. And I'll wager young Lionel knows more than he's letting on. Always skulking about, that boy." His eyes narrowed, and Miss Marple noted the venom in his tone, a resentment that went beyond the moment's crisis. "Really, Major?" Miss Marple interjected, her voice soft but carrying the weight of authority. "It's a bit early to cast blame, don't you think? We've only just begun to look for the brooch. Accusations can cloud the truth, rather like snow over a path." Reginald blinked, momentarily disarmed by her calm demeanour. "Well, perhaps," he muttered, sinking into a chair. "But mark my words, there's mischief afoot, and I'll not stand for it." The conversation turned to practical matters. Another search of the grounds, perhaps a call to the local constable. But Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere. She was thinking of the footprints, their deliberate precision, and the scarf, so conveniently placed. The lake was central to this mystery, she was certain, but its role was not yet clear. Was it a hiding place, a diversion, or something more sinister? As luncheon was announced, Lionel entered, his coat still buttoned despite the warmth of the room. He greeted the group with his usual charm, but Miss Marple noted a tension in his posture, a slight stiffness in his smile. "Any luck with the search, Aunt Beatrice?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes wary. "Nothing yet," Beatrice replied, her voice heavy with disappointment. "But Jane is helping us, and I've every confidence we'll find it." Lionel's gaze flickered to Miss Marple, and for a moment she saw something like calculation in his eyes. "Miss Marple's reputation precedes her," he said smoothly. "We're lucky to have such a sharp mind among us." His words were courteous, but Miss Marple sensed a challenge beneath them, as if he were testing her. The meal was a quiet affair, the clink of cutlery loud in the strained silence. Miss Marple ate sparingly, her thoughts on the family dynamics. Lionel's debts, Clara's reticence, Reginald's resentment and Beatrice's anxiety formed a web of motives and secrets, each strand leading back to the lake. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a stolen locket had been hidden in plain sight, its thief relying on misdirection to escape notice. Was the brooch similarly concealed, perhaps closer than anyone suspected? After luncheon, Miss Marple excused herself, claiming a need for fresh air. In truth, she wished to explore the manor's upper floors, where Mrs. Tuttle had mentioned old sporting equipment was stored. The attic, reached by a narrow staircase, was a cavernous space filled with trunks, dusty furniture, and forgotten relics of Haverford history. The air was cold, tinged with the musty scent of old wood and canvas. Miss Marple moved carefully, her eyes scanning for anything out of place. In a corner, half hidden behind a cracked mirror, she found what she sought, a pair of wooden stilts, their surfaces worn but sturdy, with leather straps still intact. The floor nearby showed faint scuff marks, recent enough to suggest use. She smiled to herself, her suspicion confirmed. Stilts could explain the footprint's abrupt end. A walker lifted above the snow, leaving no return path. But whose hands had wielded them, and to what end? As she descended, she encountered Mrs. Tuttle in the corridor, carrying a tray of linens. The housekeeper's eyes widened briefly, but she recovered quickly. "Exploring, Miss Marple?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. "Merely satisfying my curiosity," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. "Old houses like Silvermere are full of stories, don't you find? And sometimes the smallest things, a pair of stilts, say, tell the most." Mrs. Tuttle's expression remained impassive, but Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of her grip on the tray. "Stilts, ma'am. I suppose the attic's full of such oddities. The young master used to play with them as a boy." Her words were casual, but Miss Marple sensed a careful choice in them, as if she were deflecting further inquiry. Back in her room, Miss Marple sat by the window. Her knitting resumed, but her mind far from idle. The stilts were a clue, but not the whole story. Lionel, with his debts and charm, was the obvious suspect, yet his openness suggested either innocence or audacity. Clara's scarf, torn and placed so deliberately, pointed to a deeper game, perhaps a frame, or a misstep by the true culprit. Reginald's bluster and Mrs. Tuttle's quiet watchfulness added further layers, each a potential thread in the tapestry of deceit. The lake, she knew, was the heart of this mystery. Its frozen surface, its silent depths, held secrets that the snow could not fully conceal. As the afternoon light faded, casting long shadows across the manor, Miss Marple resolved to keep her eyes open and her mind alert. The truth, like a footprint in fresh snow, was there to be found if one knew where to look. Chapter 5. The Stilts Hypothesis. The afternoon sun hung low over Silvermere Manor, its pale light filtering through the heavy clouds that promised more snow. The air was sharp, carrying the bite of winter, and the lake beyond the manor's windows lay still, its frozen surface a silent witness to the morning's discoveries. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in her warmest shawl, stood alone by the boathouse, her eyes tracing the now familiar footprints that stretched across the ice and vanished mid-lake. The discovery of the stilts in the attic had sharpened her focus, like a needle finding its thread, and she was determined to test her hypothesis before the household's tensions unravelled further. The boathouse, its timbers weathered by years of lake spray, creaked softly as she stepped inside, her boots leaving faint prints on the snow-dusted floor. The short morning's search had revealed little beyond the footprints and the scarlet scrap of Clara's scarf, but Miss Marple's mind was alive with possibilities. The stilts tucked away in the attic suggested a deliberate act of misdirection, a theatrical flourish designed to baffle. She recalled a village fete in St. Mary Mead, where a stilt walker had amused the crowd by striding over muddy paths without leaving a trace. Could such a trick explain the lake's mystery? And if so, who had the cunning to orchestrate it? She examined the footprints again, kneeling carefully to avoid disturbing the snow. The tracks were deep, evenly spaced, and curiously precise, as if the walker had taken care to leave a clear impression. The absence of return prints was the key, she decided. Stilts lifted high above the snow would allow the walker to retreat without leaving further marks, creating the illusion of a vanishing act. But the effort required, balancing on stilts across ice in the dark with snow falling, was considerable. This was no impulsive prank. It was a calculated performance, and Miss Marple suspected it was tied to the missing emerald brooch. The lake itself was a marvel of winter's handiwork, its surface smooth and unyielding, thick enough to support a man's weight, as Major Reginald had attested. Miss Marple tested the ice near the shore with a cautious step, feeling its solidity beneath her boot. No cracks, no give. The footprints, then, were not a matter of someone falling through, but of someone choosing to stop, or to appear to stop. She squinted toward the lake's center, where the tracks ended, and noted a faint irregularity in the snow, a slight mounding that might suggest something dropped or concealed. But the distance and the fresh snow made it impossible to investigate further without assistance, and she was not yet ready to share her suspicions with the household. Returning to the boathouse, she studied the interior once more. The scuff marks she had noticed earlier, long, narrow drags across the floor, were still there, fainter now in the dim light, but unmistakable. She ran her gloved finger along one, feeling the rough grain of the wood. Stilts, she thought, dragged carelessly or in haste. The rowboat, propped against the wall, caught her eye, its hull dry and unused. No one had taken to the water, frozen as it was, but the boat's presence suggested other possibilities, perhaps a hiding place or a prop in some larger deception. As she emerged, the crunch of snow announced the approach of Major Reginald, his greatcoat flapping as he strode toward her, his face set in a scowl. "Miss Marple, what the devil are you doing out here alone?" he demanded, his moustache quivering with indignation. "This lake's no place for a lady in this weather. You'll catch your death, or worse, stir up more gossip." Miss Marple smiled, her expression one of mild apology. "I do beg your pardon, Major. I only wish to see the lake again to clear my thoughts. These footprints are quite the puzzle, aren't they? Like something from one of those detective stories my nephew enjoys." Reginald snorted, his breath forming a cloud in the cold air. "Puzzle, indeed. It's a lot of nonsense if you ask me. Someone's playing a trick, and I'd wager it's that scoundrel Lionel. Always had a flair for the dramatic, that boy. Probably thinks it's funny to send us chasing ghosts." His tone was gruff, but Miss Marple noted the flicker of unease in his eyes, as if he feared more than a prank. "Perhaps," she said, her voice soothing, "but tricks often reveal more than their makers intend. In my village, we once had a young man who staged a theft to cover his debts, only to be caught by a single careless detail. People are rarely as clever as they think." Reginald's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, turning instead to glare at the lake. Miss Marple followed his gaze, noting the way the snow clung to the reeds, masking whatever secrets they might hold. "Have you known Lionel long, Major?" she asked, her tone conversational but probing. "He seems a spirited young man, but perhaps a touch burdened?" "Burdened?" Reginald barked a laugh. "That's a polite way of putting it. The boy's up to his neck in debt, and he's got no one to blame but himself. Motor cars, of all things. Thought he'd make a fortune. but all he's done is tarnish the Haverford name. Beatrice is too soft on him, always has been." His voice carried a mix of disdain and frustration, and Miss Marple wondered if his resentment stemmed from more than Lionel's failures, perhaps a sense of being overlooked in the family's hierarchy. Before she could press further, Clara appeared, her cloak pulled tight against the wind. Her face was pale, her auburn hair escaping in wisps from her hood. "Miss Marple, Major," she said, her voice hesitant. "Beatrice sent me to fetch you. Luncheon is ready, and she's anxious to discuss the search." Her eyes darted to the footprints, and Miss Marple noted the way her hands clenched, as if suppressing a shiver. "Thank you, my dear," Miss Marple said, offering a reassuring smile. "We'll come directly, but tell me, Miss Thornton, do you often walk by the lake? It's such a striking view, especially for an artist like yourself." Clara hesitated, her gaze flickering to the reeds where her scarf had been found. "I do, sometimes," she admitted. "It's peaceful, or it was. But I wasn't there yesterday, not after my sketching in the conservatory. I swear it." Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple sensed a truth mingled with fear, as if Clara were caught between loyalty and doubt. Reginald muttered something about wasting time, and stomped off toward the manor, leaving Miss Marple and Clara to follow at a slower pace. "You mustn't mind the Major," Miss Marple said gently. "He's upset, but upset people often say more than they mean. You're fond of Lionel, aren't you?" Clara's flush deepened, and she nodded. "I love him, Miss Marple. He's not perfect, but he's good at heart. I know he's in trouble, but he wouldn't steal from Beatrice. He couldn't." Her words were fervent, but there was a shadow in her eyes, a doubt she couldn't quite banish. Miss Marple patted her arm, her touch light but comforting. "Love is a powerful thing, my dear, but it can cloud the eyes. Keep them open, and you may see more than you expect." Clara nodded, her expression troubled, and they walked on in silence, the snow crunching beneath their feet. Back at the manor, luncheon was served in the dining room, the same grand space where the Brooch's disappearance had first been discovered. The atmosphere was heavy, the clink of cutlery and the murmur of conversation doing little to lift the mood. Beatrice, at the head of the table, looked drawn, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying. Lionel, seated beside her, was solicitous, offering to pass the butter or refill her water. But Miss Marple noted the strain in his smile, the way his hand lingered near his coat pocket. Mrs. Tuttle, serving with her usual efficiency, moved silently, her eyes catching every detail of the room. The meal was simple, cold meats, bread, and a winter salad, but the tension made it taste of ash. Beatrice spoke little, her thoughts clearly on the brooch, while Reginald grumbled about the weather and the infernal gossip in the village. Lionel attempted to lighten the mood, recounting a humorous anecdote about a London cabbie, but his laughter rang hollow, and Clara's smile was forced. Miss Marple, eating sparingly, let her thoughts drift to the stilts. They were the key, she was certain, but their purpose remained elusive. Had Lionel used them to stage the footprints, creating a mystery to distract from his theft of the brooch? Or was someone else involved, using the lake as a canvas for deception? The scarf, too, was troubling. Its clean tear suggested intent, perhaps to implicate Clara, or to divert attention from the true culprit. As the meal ended, Miss Marple excused herself, claiming a need to rest, but her true destination was the library. a quiet room lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy drapes. She wished to think undisturbed, to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. The library was warm, a fire crackling in the grate, and she settled into an armchair, her knitting bag at her side. Her needles clicked rhythmically, a habit that steadied her thoughts, much as it had during countless village mysteries. She considered Lionel first. His debts, as Beatrice had described, were a powerful motive, and his charm could mask a calculating mind. The stilts, stored in the attic where he had once played as a boy, pointed to him. Yet his openness, the way he lingered near the lake, his easy banter, suggested either innocence or audacity. Clara, with her torn scarf and nervous demeanour, was another puzzle. Her love for Lionel was evident, but her fear hinted at knowledge she dared not voice. Was she protecting him, or had she been unwittingly drawn into his scheme? Reginald's resentment was less subtle, his accusations against Lionel carrying the weight of old grudges. He saw himself as the rightful steward of Silvermere, Miss Marple suspected, and Lionel's failures were a personal affront. Yet his bluster seemed genuine, lacking the guile needed for such an elaborate trick as the footprints. Mrs. Tuttle, with her quiet watchfulness, was a different matter. Her comment about Lionel's childhood games with stilts had been too pointed, as if she were guiding Miss Marple's thoughts, or deflecting them. The brooch itself was the heart of the mystery. Its value was undeniable, but its sentimental weight, as Beatrice had emphasized, made its loss all the more personal. Had it been stolen for profit, or was it a pawn in a larger game, perhaps to sow discord among the Haverfords? The lake, with its frozen secrets, was central, and Miss Marple resolved to revisit it that evening, when the household was occupied, and the moonlight might reveal what daylight concealed. As she left the library, she passed Mrs. Tuttle in the hall, the housekeeper's arms laden with linens. "Still pondering, Miss Marple?" Mrs. Tuttle asked, her tone polite but with a hint of curiosity. "Oh, just wool gathering," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. "But old houses like this have so many stories, don't they? And sometimes the smallest things, a footprint, a torn scarf, tell the most." She watched Mrs. Tuttle closely, noting the slight pause before the housekeeper nodded and moved on. Back in her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting idle as she gazed at the lake. The stilts hypothesis was taking shape, but it was incomplete. The footprints were a diversion, she was certain, but their purpose, whether to conceal a theft, frame an innocent, or create a mystery, remained unclear. The scarf, the brooch, the lake, the family tensions, all were threads in a tapestry that was slowly coming into focus. And as the afternoon faded into dusk, Miss Marple knew that the truth, like the snow outside, was waiting to be uncovered, one careful step at a time. Chapter 6. Clara's Confession. The twilight at Silvermere Manor, draped Sherdai, wrapped in a delicate lavender glow, lent the old house an air of melancholy grandeur. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the library that evening, felt the weight of the day's discoveries pressing upon her. The fire in the grate cast flickering shadows across the oak-panelled walls, and the heavy silence of the room was broken only by the occasional creak of the settling house. Her knitting lay untouched in her lap, her mind too occupied with the puzzle of the vanishing brooch and the enigmatic footprints on Silvermere Lake, the stilts, the scarlet scarf, the lake itself. Each element was a piece of a larger design, and Miss Marple was determined to discern its shape. The door opened softly, and Clara Thornton slipped into the room, her slight figure almost ghostly in the dim light. Her auburn hair was loose, framing her pale face, and her eyes, wide and green, carried a haunted look. She hesitated at the threshold, clutching a small sketchbook to her chest, as if it were a shield. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "may I speak with you?" It's important." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her expression one of gentle encouragement. "Of course, my dear. Come sit. You look troubled." She gestured to a chair by the fire, noting the girl's trembling hands as she sat. Clara's cloak, still damp from an earlier venture outside, hung loosely about her shoulders, and Miss Marple caught a glimpse of a torn hem, a detail that sparked a quiet curiosity. Clara perched on the edge of the chair, her fingers twisting the sketchbook's cover. "I lied this morning," she blurted, her voice breaking, "about the scarf. I was at the lake yesterday, but I didn't tell anyone because I was afraid." Her eyes darted to the fire, as if seeking courage in its glow. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but steady. "Afraid of what, Miss Thornton? You may tell me. I'm not one for judging, only for listening." Her tone was warm, disarming, and Clara's shoulders seemed to relax, if only a fraction. "I was sketching," Clara began, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The light was perfect yesterday afternoon, with the snow just starting to fall. I was near the reeds, not far from the boathouse, working on a study of the lake. I saw Lionel there, near the boathouse door. He didn't see me at first. He was carrying something, long poles or sticks, I couldn't quite tell. He looked furtive, as if he didn't want to be seen." She paused, swallowing hard. "Then he noticed me and waved, all smiles, as if nothing was wrong. But it was odd, Miss Marple. Those poles, they weren't oars or fishing rods. They looked like stilts." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained composed. "Stilts, you say? That's most interesting. And you didn't mention this earlier because—" Clara's cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her sketchbook. "I didn't want to betray Lionel. I love him, and I know he's in trouble. Those debts Beatrice mentioned, but I couldn't believe he'd steal from her. Not the brooch, not something so precious to her. But when I saw the scarf this morning, my scarf, torn and caught in the reeds, I started to wonder. What if he's trying to protect me or use me somehow?" Her voice broke, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. Miss Marple reached out, patting Clara's hand with a gentle firmness. There, my dear. It's a heavy thing to doubt someone you love, but it's braver to face the truth than to hide from it. Tell me, what did you do after you saw Lionel?" Clara wiped her cheek, her voice steadier now. "I packed up my sketchbook and went back to the conservatory. I was shaken, but I told myself it was nothing. Lionel's always been impulsive, full of grand ideas. I thought maybe he was planning some surprise, a game. He's like that sometimes, playful, theatrical. But then the brooch went missing, and those footprints," she shivered, clutching the sketchbook tighter. "It's all so strange, Miss Marple. I don't know what to think." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The stilts, the scarf, the footprints. Clara's confession added a new thread to the tapestry, one that pointed directly to Lionel. Yet something in the girl's account nagged at her, a detail that didn't quite fit. If Lionel had been seen with the stilts, Why place the scarf so conspicuously? Was it a mistake, or part of a larger design? "You've done well to tell me this," she said kindly. "It's a piece of the puzzle, and every piece helps. Now tell me, did anyone else see you by the lake?" Clara shook her head. "I don't think so. The snow was falling, and it was getting dark. I was alone, or so I thought. But someone must have seen me. Or how else did my scarf end up there? I checked it later. It was torn, but I didn't notice when it happened. I thought I'd caught it on something in the house, but now I'm not sure." Miss Marple's needles resumed their quiet clicking, a soothing counterpoint to Clara's distress. "People often leave traces they don't intend, my dear. In my village, there was a young woman who lost a ribbon in a garden, only to find it later tied to a gate as if to mark her presence. It turned out to be a jealous rival's doing. The scarf may be such a trace, or it may be a message. We shall see." Clara's eyes widened, a flicker of hope in their depths. "You think someone else put it there? To make it look like I was involved?" "It's possible," Miss Marple said, her tone measured. "But we mustn't jump to conclusions. The lake is telling us a story, and we've only heard part of it." She paused, considering Clara's pale face and trembling hands. The girl was caught in a web of love and suspicion, and Miss Marple knew how such emotions could cloud the mind. "Keep your eyes open, Clara. You're an artist. You see things others miss. If you notice anything else, no matter how small, come to me. We'll sort this out together." Clara nodded, her expression a mix of gratitude and fear. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I feel so lost here sometimes. Silvermere is beautiful, but it's so heavy with history. I don't belong here, not really." She rose, clutching her sketchbook, and slipped out of the room, her footsteps soft on the polished floor. Miss Marple remained by the fire, her thoughts turning over Clara's words like stones in a stream. The stilts were no longer a hypothesis, but a fact, or near enough, and Lionel was at the centre of it. Yet the scarf troubled her. Its placement was too deliberate, its tear too clean, as if meant to be found. Was Lionel framing Clara, or was someone else framing them both? The lake, with its frozen secrets, was the key, and Miss Marple resolved to revisit it under cover of darkness, when the household was asleep. Dinner that evening was a strained affair, the dining room's grandeur overshadowed by the weight of suspicion. Beatrice, still pale from the loss of her brooch, picked at her food, her eyes darting between Lionel and Clara. Reginald, at the foot of the table, was in a foul mood, his comments laced with barbs about careless young people and family disgrace. Lionel, seated beside Clara, maintained his charm, though Miss Marple noted the way his hand lingered near his coat, as if guarding something within. Clara ate in silence, her gaze fixed on her plate, though her eyes occasionally met Miss Marple's, seeking reassurance. Mrs. Tuttle, serving with her usual efficiency, was a quiet presence, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Miss Marple caught her watching Lionel, a fleeting look of concern, or was it suspicion, crossing her face. The housekeeper's loyalty to Beatrice was clear, but her knowledge of the household's secrets made her a figure to watch. Miss Marple recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a butler's silence had concealed a theft for years, only to be undone by a single careless remark. Mrs. Tuttle, she sensed, was no such fool, but her reticence was telling. After dinner, the household retired to the drawing-room, but Miss Marple pleaded fatigue and slipped away, her true intention to explore the lake by moonlight. She donned her coat and scarf, tucking a small flashlight into her pocket, a modern contrivance she rarely used but deemed necessary tonight. The manor was quiet, the staff occupied with evening duties, and she moved silently through the side door, the snow crunching under her boots. The lake was a vision in the moonlight, its surface shimmering like polished silver. The footprints, now partially dusted with fresh snow, were still visible, leading out to their mysterious end. Miss Marple followed them, her flashlight casting a narrow beam across the ice. The cold was biting, but her mind was clear, focused on the puzzle. At the point where the footprints stopped, she paused, sweeping the light across the snow. There, barely discernible, was a faint depression, as if something small had been dropped and covered by the night's snowfall. She knelt, brushing the snow away with her glove, but found nothing. No brooch, no clue, only ice. Disappointed but undeterred, she turned her attention to the reeds where Clara's scarf had been found. The moonlight revealed little, but she noticed a faint disturbance in the snow near the boathouse, a series of shallow scratches that might have been made by stilts or poles dragged across the ground. She followed them to the boathouse door, which was locked but loose on its hinges. A gentle push revealed a gap, and she slipped inside, her flashlight illuminating the familiar space. The scuff marks on the floor were clearer now, illuminated by her beam. They led to a corner where a pile of old canvas tarps lay heaped against the wall. She lifted one, revealing a small wooden box, its lid slightly ajar. Inside was a single leather strap, worn but intact, the kind used to secure stilts to one's feet. Her heart quickened. The stilts had been here, used and returned, but by whom? Lionel, with his debts and theatrical flair, was the obvious suspect, but the scarf suggested a more complex game. A rustle outside made her freeze. Extinguishing her flashlight, she peered through a crack in the boathouse door. A figure moved in the shadows, Mrs. Tuttle, her lantern casting a soft glow as she retrieved a glove from the snow. "Couldn't sleep, ma'am," she said, spotting Miss Marple. "Thought I'd check the grounds again." Her tone was calm, but her eyes were sharp, and Miss Marple sensed she had been watched. "Very diligent of you," Miss Marple replied, stepping out into the moonlight. "The lake does keep its secrets, doesn't it?" "But secrets have a way of coming to light." Mrs. Tuttle nodded, her expression unreadable, and returned to the manor, leaving Miss Marple alone with her thoughts. Back in her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting idle as she pondered Clara's confession. The girl's fear was genuine, her love for Lionel a complicating factor. The stilts, the scarf, the footprints, all pointed to a deliberate act, but the motive remained elusive. Was Lionel the mastermind, using the lake to stage a theft, or was he a pawn in a larger scheme? The scarf, torn and placed so carefully, suggested a second player, someone with a subtler hand. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the village scandals of St. Mary Mead, where love and greed often intertwined. Here at Silvermere, the stakes were higher, the setting grander, but the human heart was the same. As the moonlight bathed the lake in silver, she knew the truth was close, hidden in the interplay of loyalty and betrayal. Tomorrow she would press further, watching Lionel, Clara, and even Mrs. Tuttle for the slip that would unravel the mystery of Silvermere Lake. Chapter 7. The Major's Outburst. The breakfast room at Silvermere Manor was bathed in the pale light of a winter morning, the snow outside reflecting a soft glow through the tall windows. The table, set with fine china and silver, bore a spread of kedgeree, toast and marmalade. But the atmosphere was far from convivial. Miss Jane Marple, seated near Lady Beatrice Haverford, sipped her tea with her usual quiet observance, her sharp eyes noting the strained expressions around her. The events of the previous day, the vanishing footprints, Clara's torn scarf, and her whispered confession in the library, had tightened the web of suspicion, and the household seemed poised on the edge of a revelation or a rupture. Beatrice, at the head of the table, looked worn, her silver hair slightly dishevelled, as if sleep had eluded her. Her hands, usually steady, trembled as she buttered her toast, and her eyes darted nervously towards the others. Lionel Haverford, her nephew, sat to her right, his charm subdued, but still present in the way he offered to pour her tea. His heavy woolen coat, worn despite the warmth of the room, hung over his chair, its bulk drawing Miss Marple's attention. Clara Thornton, Lionel's fiancée, sat beside him, her auburn hair neatly pinned, but her face pale, her gaze fixed on her plate as if to avoid the tension in the air. Major Reginald Haverford, at the foot of the table, was already in a state of agitation. His ruddy face flushed, and his moustache bristling as he stabbed at his kedgeree with unnecessary force. Mrs. Tuttle, the housekeeper, moved silently around the table, her starched apron a stark contrast to the rich furnishings. Her presence was unobtrusive, yet Miss Marple noted the way her eyes lingered on Lionel, a flicker of something, concern perhaps, or suspicion, passing across her face as she refilled the teapot. The room's silence was broken only by the clink of cutlery and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows, a reminder of the snow that continued to blanket Silvermere Lake. It was Major Reginald who shattered the uneasy calm. Slamming his fork down, he pushed back his chair with a scrape that made Clara flinch. "This is intolerable, Beatrice," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the panelled walls. "That brooch of yours gone without a trace, and we're all sitting here pretending nothing's amiss. I'll tell you what's amiss, that boy!" He pointed a thick finger at Lionel, his eyes blazing. "He's up to his neck in debt, and now your precious heirloom's vanished. Coincidence? I think not." Lionel's face reddened, but he maintained his composure, leaning back in his chair with a forced smile. "Really, Major, you do have a flair for the dramatic. Accusing me without a shred of evidence, that's hardly sporting." His tone was light, but Miss Marple caught the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed a rapid rhythm on the tablecloth, betraying a nerves beneath the bravado. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Reginald, please! This is no time for accusations. We're all upset, but tearing into each other won't bring the brooch back." Her voice was pleading, but there was a weariness in it, as if she feared the truth behind Reginald's words. Clara, silent until now, looked up, her green eyes wide with distress. "Lionel wouldn't steal from you, Beatrice. He loves you. He's not that kind of man." Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple noted the way her hand reached instinctively toward Lionel, only to stop short, as if unsure of her own conviction. Reginald snorted, his moustache quivering. "Love? Bah! Love doesn't pay creditors, girl. That boy's been skulking about. Probably sold the brooch already to some shady dealer in London. I've half a mind to call the constable and have him searched." He glared at Lionel, who met his gaze with a defiant stare, though his fingers continued their restless dance. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, observed the exchange with her usual quiet attentiveness. Reginald's outburst was not unexpected. His resentment toward Lionel had been simmering since her arrival, fueled by a sense of entitlement to Silvermere's legacy. But his accusations, though blunt, lacked subtlety, suggesting a man more inclined to bluster than to scheme. Lionel, on the other hand, was a study in contrasts, his charm a polished veneer over a core of unease. The coat, she noted again, was an odd choice for the warm dining room, its bulk hinting at something concealed within. "Major Reginald," Miss Marple said, her voice mild but cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. "It's natural to be upset when something precious is lost, but accusations are like snow. They can cover the truth rather than reveal it. In my village, we once had a case where a missing watch was blamed on a young man, only to be found in a magpie's nest. We must look carefully before we judge." Reginald blinked, momentarily disarmed by her calm authority. "Well, perhaps," he muttered, sinking back into his chair. "But I'll not stand for this nonsense. Someone's responsible, and I'll wager it's closer than we think." Beatrice, her composure fraying, turned to Miss Marple. "Jane, you've seen the footprints, the scarf. What do you make of it all? I feel as if I'm losing my mind, with this lake and its secrets staring at us." Her voice was almost a whisper, and Miss Marple saw the fear in her eyes, not just for the brooch, but for the harmony of her household. Before Miss Marple could respond, Mrs. Tuttle, who had been hovering near the sideboard, stepped forward, her expression one of quiet deference. "If I may, my lady," she said, her voice low but clear, "I couldn't help overhearing yesterday's talk of the attic. There's old sporting equipment up there. Cricket bats, croquet mallets, even a pair of stilts from when Master Lionel was a boy. I saw him there a few days ago, looking through the trunks. Perhaps it's nothing, but I thought you should know." Lionel's head snapped up, his smile vanishing. "Mrs. Tuttle, really? Digging through old memories hardly makes me a thief. I was looking for a cricket bat, if you must know. Thought I might organize a game if the snow clears." His tone was defensive, and Miss Marple noted the way his hand moved to his coat, as if to reassure himself of something hidden. Beatrice's eyes widened, and she turned to Lionel, her voice trembling. "Lionel, you were in the attic? Why didn't you say so? Those stilts, could they have anything to do with the footprints?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Lionel laughed, a sound too sharp to be genuine. "Stilts? Aunt Beatrice, you're letting your imagination run wild. I'm no circus performer, and I've no reason to go traipsing across the lake. This is all getting rather absurd." But his eyes darted to Clara, and Miss Marple caught a flicker of unease, as if he feared what she might say. Clara, pale and silent, kept her gaze on her hands, her fingers twisting together in her lap. Miss Marple, watching her closely, recalled their conversation in the library. Clara's confession about seeing Lionel with the stilts, her fear that he was involved in something sinister. The girl's silence now was telling, a loyalty to Lionel warring with her doubts. Miss Marple made a mental note to speak with her again, away from the others, where she might reveal more. The breakfast ended in a strained hush, the household dispersing with murmured excuses. Beatrice retired to her sitting room, her steps heavy with worry. Reginald stormed off, muttering about taking matters into my own hands. Lionel lingered, helping Clara with her chair, but his touch was perfunctory. lacking the warmth of a devoted fiancée. Clara, for her part, avoided his gaze, her expression one of quiet turmoil. Miss Marple remained at the table, her tea cooling as she considered Mrs. Tuttle's revelation. The housekeeper's mention of the stilts was no accident, she was certain. It was a calculated move, perhaps to shift suspicion onto Lionel, or perhaps to protect someone else. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had known a housekeeper who had shielded a wayward son by dropping subtle hints that led nowhere. And she wondered if Mrs. Tuttle was playing a similar game. The stilts, the footprints, the scarf, all pointed to Lionel. But the puzzle was too neat, too deliberate, as if someone were orchestrating the clues to mislead. She rose, intending to return to the boathouse for another look, but paused as Mrs. Tuttle re-entered to clear the table. "Mrs. Tuttle," Miss Marple said, her voice conversational, "you've been at Silvermere a long time, haven't you? You must know its every secret from the attic to the lake." The housekeeper's hands paused on a plate, her eyes meeting Miss Marple's with a guarded expression. "20 years, ma'am," she replied. "I know the house, yes, but secrets? Those belong to the family, not to me." Her tone was polite, but there was a firmness in it, a barrier Miss Marple recognized from years of probing village confidences. "Of course," Miss Marple said, smiling. "But sometimes those who see the most say the least. Like that scarf, for instance, so bright, so easy to spot in the snow. It's curious, isn't it, how it found its way to the reeds?" She watched Mrs. Tuttle closely, noting the slight tightening of her lips, the brief flicker of unease. "Curious indeed, ma'am," Mrs. Tuttle said, resuming her work. "But the lake has a way of catching things, scarves, secrets, all sorts." She moved away, her apron rustling, and Miss Marple let her go, her mind cataloguing the exchange. The housekeeper knew more than she admitted, but whether she was an ally or a player in this drama remained unclear. Miss Marple made her way to the hall, donning her coat and scarf for another venture to the lake. The snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting down to blur the footprints she had studied earlier. She followed their path, her boots sinking into the fresh powder, and paused where they ended, mid-lake, the ice smooth and unyielding beneath. The faint depression she had noticed the previous night was now covered, but she marked its location in her mind, a potential clue to be revisited. At the boathouse, she examined the door, noting the loose hinges and the faint scratches in the snow outside. Inside, the scuff marks on the floor were still visible, and the wooden box with its leather strap stood as silent evidence of the stilt's use. She pictured Lionel, or someone else, striding across the ice, the stilts lifting them above the snow for a silent retreat. It was a clever trick, but it required planning, nerve, and a reason to go to such lengths. The brooch, she suspected, was not far away, perhaps hidden in plain sight, as so many secrets were. As she emerged, she saw Lionel approaching, his coat buttoned tightly, his hands in his pockets. "Miss Marple, you're persistent," he said, his smile tight. "Still chasing ghosts on the lake?" His tone was playful, but his eyes were wary, and Miss Marple sensed he was testing her, probing for what she knew. "Ghosts leave no footprints, Mr. Haverford," she replied, her voice mild. "But people do, and they often tell a story. Those stilts in the attic, for instance. Such an interesting relic. Did you ever use them as a boy?" Her question was casual, but she watched his reaction closely, noting the slight stiffening of his posture. "Stilts?" He laughed, a touch too loudly. "Oh, years ago, perhaps. Childhood games, you know. Hardly relevant to this business with the brooch." He turned away as if to end the conversation, but Miss Marple pressed on. "Childhood games can inspire grown-up tricks," she said, her eyes twinkling. "In my village, a boy once used a ladder to fake a burglary, thinking it clever. He wasn't, of course. The truth always comes out." Lionel's smile faltered, and he excused himself, claiming a need to check on Beatrice. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind racing. The Major's outburst had crystallized the household's tensions, and Lionel's defensiveness confirmed her suspicions. The stilts, the scarf, the footprints, all were part of a performance, but the motive remained elusive. Was Lionel the thief, using the lake to create a mystery, or was he a scapegoat, his debts making him an easy target? Clara's confession and Mrs. Tuttle's pointed remark suggested a deeper game, one Miss Marple was determined to unravel. As she returned to the manor, the snow falling thicker now, she felt the weight of the puzzle settling into place. The brooch was close, she sensed, hidden not in the lake's depths, but in the heart of Silvermere's secrets. Tomorrow she would watch and listen, her quiet presence a trap for the unwary. The truth, like the snow outside, was accumulating, layer by layer, and Miss Marple was ready to sweep it clear. Chapter 8. The Lake at Midnight. The night had settled over Silvermere Manor with a stillness that seemed to amplify every creak and whisper within its ancient walls. The snow, which had fallen steadily through the evening, cloaked the world outside in a silence so profound it felt almost conspiratorial. Miss Jane Marple, unable to sleep, sat by her bedroom window, her knitting idle in her lap as she gazed out at Silvermere Lake. The moonlight cast a silver sheen across the frozen surface, transforming it into a stage where shadows danced and secrets lingered. The day's events, Major Reginald's outburst, Clara's confession, and the mounting evidence of the stilts had sharpened her focus, and she felt the mystery drawing her toward the lake once more, as if it were calling her to uncover its truths. She rose, her movements deliberate, and donned her warmest coat and scarf, tucking her small flashlight into her pocket. The manor was hushed, the household having retired early after a tense dinner, marked by stilted conversation and wary glances. Miss Marple moved silently through the darkened corridors, her boots muffled by the thick rugs, and slipped out through the side door into the crisp night air. The snow crunched softly underfoot, and the cold bit at her cheeks, but her mind was alert, her senses attuned to the smallest detail. The lake was a vision of ethereal beauty, its icy expanse glowing under the moon's pale light. The footprints, now partially obscured by fresh snow, still traced their enigmatic path from the boathouse to the lake's center, where they vanished in a way that defied logic. Miss Marple followed them, her flashlight casting a narrow beam across the ice, careful not to disturb the delicate layer of powder. The air was sharp with the scent of frost, and the reeds along the shore stood like sentinels, their brittle tips swaying faintly in the breeze. She paused where the footprints ended, her beam sweeping the snow for any sign of the depression she had noticed the previous night. The fresh snowfall had all but erased it, but she marked the spot in her mind, a faint irregularity that suggested something, perhaps the brooch, had been dropped or hidden. The ice here was solid, unmarred by cracks, confirming Major Reginald's assertion that no one had fallen through. The stilts, she was certain, were the key, allowing the walker to retreat without leaving return tracks. But the question remained, why stage such an elaborate deception? Her thoughts turned to Lionel Haverford, whose debts and guarded charm made him the obvious suspect. Clara's confession about seeing him with stilts near the boathouse was damning, yet the torn scarf suggested a more intricate plot, perhaps designed to shift suspicion onto her. Mrs. Tuttle's pointed mention of the attic stilts had been too deliberate, as if she were steering the narrative toward Lionel, or away from someone else. And Major Reginald, with his bluster and resentment, seemed too straightforward for such a subtle trick, though his accusations kept the household on edge. Miss Marple made her way to the boathouse, its dark silhouette looming against the moonlit snow. The door, loose on its hinges, creaked as she pushed it open, her flashlight illuminating the familiar space. The scuff marks on the floor, faint but still visible, traced a path to the corner where she had found the wooden box with its leather strap. She examined it again, noting the worn grain of the wood and the faint dust disturbed by recent handling. The stilts had been here, used and returned, but by whom? Lionel, with his theatrical flair, was the likeliest candidate, yet the scarf's placement nagged at her, a detail too calculated to be accidental. As she knelt to inspect the floor, a rustle in the reeds outside made her heart skip. She extinguished her flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, peering through a crack in the boathouse door. A figure moved in the moonlight, their lantern casting a soft glow across the snow. It was Mrs. Tuttle, her apron replaced by a heavy shawl, her movements cautious as she bent to retrieve something from the ground. A glove, Miss Marple realized, its dark shape stark against the snow. "Couldn't sleep, ma'am," Mrs. Tuttle said, her voice low but clear as she spotted Miss Marple emerging from the boathouse. "Thought I'd check the grounds again, in case the brooch turned up." Miss Marple stepped into the moonlight, her smile disarming despite the hour. "Very diligent, Mrs. Tuttle. The lake does seem to draw us all, doesn't it? Like a mirror, reflecting more than we expect." Her tone was conversational, but her eyes were sharp, noting the housekeeper's slight hesitation, the way her hand tightened around the glove. "Indeed, ma'am," Mrs. Tuttle replied, her expression unreadable. "It's a strange place in winter, full of shadows. I'd best get back. The cold's no good for my bones." She turned toward the manor, her lantern swaying, and Miss Marple watched her go, her mind racing. Mrs. Tuttle's presence was no coincidence, she was certain. The housekeeper's quiet efficiency masked a keen awareness, and her excuse of a lost glove felt too convenient, a cover for something more purposeful. Alone again, Miss Marple returned to the boathouse, her flashlight sweeping the corners. The canvas tarps, the rowboat, the scattered fishing gear, all were as she had left them, but a faint glint caught her eye, half hidden beneath a coil of rope. She knelt, brushing aside the rope to reveal a small metal buckle, the kind used to secure a stilt strap. It was polished, recently used, and its presence confirmed her suspicions. The stilts had been employed not long ago, likely the night of the brooch's disappearance. She tucked the buckle into her pocket, a tangible clue to add to her growing collection. The lake, she realized, was more than a backdrop. It was a canvas for deception, its frozen surface perfect for staging a mystery. The footprints, ending so abruptly, were meant to suggest the impossible. A walker vanishing into thin air. But stilts, lifted above the snow, explained the trick. and the scarf torn and placed in the reeds was a deliberate misdirection, perhaps to implicate Clara or to distract from the true culprit. Lionel's debts made him the obvious suspect, but the puzzle felt too neat. As if someone were orchestrating the clues to point only in his direction. Miss Marple stepped back onto the ice, her flashlight tracing the path of the footprints once more. The moonlight revealed faint scratches near the boathouse, barely visible under the fresh snow, as if something had been dragged. Stilts, perhaps, or a pole used to steady the walker. She followed the scratches to the reeds where the scarlet scrap had been found and noted a faint disturbance in the snow. A subtle mounding that suggested something had been buried or concealed. She brushed at it gently, but the snow was too deep, and the cold numbed her fingers. She would need daylight and perhaps assistance to explore further. Her thoughts turned to Clara, whose confession had shifted the puzzle's shape. The girl's love for Lionel was a vulnerability, making her both a potential ally and a pawn. Had she seen more than she admitted, or was her fear a sign of complicity? Mrs. Tuttle, too, was a puzzle. Her loyalty to Beatrice was unquestioned, but her late-night wanderings suggested she knew more than she let on. And Major Reginald, with his loud accusations, might be a distraction, his resentment a convenient cover for someone else's scheme. As she made her way back to the manor, the snow falling thicker now, Miss Marple recalled a case in St. Mary Mead where a stolen brooch had been hidden in a flower pot, its thief relying on the household's chaos to escape notice. Here, the lake was the flower pot, its icy expanse a hiding place for secrets. The brooch, she suspected, was not far, perhaps in Lionel's coat, as her instincts whispered, or buried in the snow where the footprints ended. But the scarf troubled her most, its clean tear a sign of intent, as if someone had torn it, deliberately to draw attention. Back in her room, she sat by the fire, her knitting resumed but her mind far from idle. The buckle in her pocket was a small triumph, a piece of evidence that tied the stilts to the crime. Lionel remained the central figure, his debts and behaviour pointing to guilt. But the scarf suggested a second player, someone with a subtler hand. Clara, with her artist's eye, might have seen more than she realised, and Mrs. Tuttle's nocturnal vigilance hinted at knowledge she kept close. Miss Marple considered the household's dynamics, Beatrice's distress, Reginald's bluster, Clara's fear, Lionel's charm, and Mrs. Tuttle's silence. Each was a character in a drama, their motives interwoven like threads in a tapestry. The lake, with its frozen secrets, was the stage, and the footprints were its opening act. But the play was far from over, and Miss Marple knew that the next act would require careful observation, a gentle nudge to provoke a slip. She rose, her eyes drawn to the window where the lake glimmered under the moon. Tomorrow she would press further, perhaps confronting Lionel directly or coaxing more from Clara. The scarf, the stilts, the footprints, all were clues, but the brooch was the prize, and its hiding place was close. She felt it. As she prepared for bed, the manor's silence enveloping her, Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of possibilities, each one leading back to the lake and its midnight mysteries. The truth, like the snow outside, was settling into place, and she was ready to uncover it, one careful step at a time. Chapter 9. Lionel's Gambit. The morning sun struggled through heavy clouds, casting a muted glow over Silvermere Manor and its snow-laden grounds. The air was thick with the promise of more snow, and the lake beyond the manor's windows lay serene, its frozen surface a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the morning room with a cup of tea, felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon her. The footprints, the stilts, the scarlet scarf, and Clara's confession had woven a complex tapestry. And the metal buckle in her pocket, found in the boathouse the previous night, was a tangible thread, pulling her closer to the truth. Yet the heart of the puzzle remained elusive, hidden in the interplay of motives and deceptions within the Haverford household. Breakfast had been a quiet affair, the tension from Major Reginald's outburst lingering like a fog. Beatrice, pale and withdrawn, had barely spoken, her eyes fixed on the empty space where her emerald brooch should have been. Lionel, ever the charming nephew, had maintained a veneer of cheer, but Miss Marple had noted the strain in his smile, the way his hand lingered near his heavy coat, still worn despite the room's warmth. Clara, silent and nervous, had avoided his gaze, her artist's hands fidgeting with her napkin. Mrs. Tuttle, moving with her usual efficiency, had served with a egged watchfulness that Miss Marple found increasingly significant. The housekeeper's late-night presence by the lake, under the guise of retrieving a glove, suggested a role beyond mere loyalty to Beatrice. Miss Marple had decided it was time to press forward, to test the waters and provoke a reaction. Lionel, with his debts and theatrical flair, was the linchpin, and she resolved to confront him privately, to see if she could shake loose a clue. She found her opportunity after breakfast when the household dispersed. Beatrice to her sitting room, Reginald to the library with a newspaper, and Clara to the conservatory, where she claimed to be sketching. Lionel lingered in the hall, adjusting his coat as if reluctant to part with it, and Miss Marple seized the moment. "Mr. Haverford," she said, her voice mild but carrying a quiet authority, "might I have a word? The garden is quite lovely in the snow, and I could use a young man's arm to steady me." Her smile was disarming, and Lionel, though his eyes narrowed briefly, could hardly refuse without drawing attention. "Of course, Miss Marple," he replied, his charm snapping into place like a well-rehearsed mask. "A walk in the snow sounds just the thing." He offered his arm, and they stepped out into the crisp morning, the snow crunching under their boots as they followed a path toward the lake. The garden was a winter wonderland, its hedges and statues draped in white, but Miss Marple's attention was on Lionel. His coat, bulky and out of place, was a constant presence, and she noted the way his hand strayed to its pocket, as if reassuring himself of something within. "It's a curious business, this brooch," she began, her tone conversational. "Those footprints on the lake are quite the trick, don't you think? So deliberate, so theatrical, almost as if someone wanted to create a mystery." Lionel laughed, a sound that rang a touch too loud in the quiet air. "Theatrical? Aunt Jane, you're too clever for us country folk. I suppose you think I staged it all, like some music hall act." His tone was light, but his eyes were wary, and Miss Marple caught the slight tightening of his jaw. "Not at all," she said, her voice gentle but probing. "But tricks do have a way of revealing their makers. In my village, we had a young man who faked a burglary to cover a debt, using a ladder to leave false tracks. He thought himself clever, but a single slip, a dropped glove, say, gave him away. Those stilts in the attic, for instance, are an interesting detail. They could make footprints vanish quite neatly, couldn't they?" Lionel's step faltered, and for a moment his charm slipped, revealing a flash of unease. "Stilts?" he said, recovering quickly. "Good heavens, Miss Marple! You've been reading too many detective stories. I haven't touched those old things since I was a boy. Besides, why would I go to such trouble over a brooch? I'm not that desperate." His laugh was forced, and Miss Marple noted the way his hand tightened around his coat pocket. "Desperation is a curious thing," she said, her eyes twinkling. "It can make people do the most extraordinary things, like walking on stilts across a frozen lake. But you're right, it does seem an effort. Unless, of course, the goal was not just to take the brooch, but to create a puzzle, to distract from something else." She paused, letting her words hang in the air, watching as Lionel's smile grew strained. "You've quite an imagination," he said, his voice tight. "But I assure you, I'm no mastermind. I was in the boathouse that day, yes, looking for fishing gear, not stilts. Clara saw me. She told you, didn't she?" His mention of Clara was deliberate, a deflection, and Miss Marple noted the hint of accusation in his tone, as if he suspected Clara's confession had betrayed him. "She mentioned seeing you, yes," Miss Marple said, her tone unchanged. "With poles, she thought. An artist's eye notices such things even if she doesn't understand their significance. But the scarf, Mr. Haverford, that's the real puzzle. Torn so neatly, placed so carefully in the reeds, almost as if it were meant to be found." Lionel's face paled, but he recovered with a shrug. "Clara's scarf? She's always losing things. Probably caught it on a branch and didn't notice. You're making mountains out of molehills, Miss Marple." He quickened his pace, as if eager to end the conversation, but Miss Marple kept up, her small steps steady in the snow. "Perhaps," she said, her voice soft but piercing, "but molehills have a way of hiding treasures, don't they? Like a brooch, tucked away where no one would think to look." She stopped, her eyes fixed on Lionel's coat, and for a moment she thought he might bolt. Instead, he forced a laugh, his hand slipping into his pocket as if by reflex. "You're a sharp one, I'll give you that," he said, his tone light, but his eyes hard. "But I've nothing to hide. Shall we head back? Aunt Beatrice will be wondering where we've got to." He turned toward the manor and Miss Marple followed, her mind racing with the certainty that Lionel was hiding something, perhaps the brooch itself, concealed in that ever-present coat. As they neared the manor, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Clara's confession and Mrs. Tuttle's nocturnal wanderings. The scarf, the stilts, the footprints, all were part of a carefully staged performance, but the motive remained elusive. Was Lionel the mastermind, using the lake to distract from his theft? Or was he a pawn, his debts making him an easy target for another's scheme? The buckle in her pocket, found in the boathouse, was a concrete link to the stilts, but it was not enough to unravel the mystery entirely. Inside, the manor was warm, the scent of beeswax polish mingling with the faint smoke of the fires. Mrs. Marple excused herself, claiming a need to rest, but her true intention was to follow Lionel. She lingered in the hall, her small figure unobtrusive, and watched as he slipped toward the boathouse, his coat still buttoned tightly. Moving quietly, she followed at a distance, her boots silent on the snow-dusted path. The lake was calm, the moonlight from the previous night replaced by a dull grey sky, but the boathouse loomed as it had before, its secrets intact. Lionel entered, leaving the door ajar, and Miss Marple positioned herself behind a snow-laden hedge, her eyes sharp despite the cold. Through the crack in the door, she saw him kneel by the pile of tarps, his hands fumbling with something small. Her heart quickened. Could it be the brooch? But before she could see more, he stood, patting his coat pocket and muttering to himself. "Safe for now," he said, his voice low but clear, and Miss Marple felt a thrill of confirmation. The brooch, she was certain, was in that coat, hidden in plain sight, just as she had suspected. Lionel emerged, glancing around as if sensing he was watched, and Miss Marple shrank back, her small frame hidden by the hedge. He returned to the manor, his stride purposeful, and she waited, her mind racing. The boathouse held no further clues. She had searched it thoroughly, but Lionel's actions confirmed her suspicions. The stilts had been used to stage the footprints, the scarf to implicate Clara, and the brooch, she believed, was concealed in his coat. A bold move that relied on the household's distraction. Back in her room, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resumed but her thoughts far from idle. Lionel's gambit was clear. Create a mystery to cover his theft, using the lake as a stage and Clara's scarf as a prop. But the scarf's clean tear suggested a second hand, someone who knew of his plan or sought to exploit it. Mrs. Tuttle, with her sharp eyes and late-night wanderings, was a possibility, though her loyalty to Beatrice made her an unlikely culprit. Clara, with her fear and love for Lionel, might have been coerced into silence, her scarf torn to protect him or to deflect suspicion. Miss Marple considered the household's dynamics, Beatrice's distress, Reginald's resentment, Clara's fear, and Mrs. Tuttle's silence. Each played a role, but Lionel was the central figure, his debts driving him to a desperate act. The stilts, the footprints, the scarf, all were part of his gambit, but the puzzle was not complete. Why implicate Clara? And what role did Mrs. Tuttle play, with her convenient appearances and cryptic remarks? As the afternoon faded, Miss Marple resolved to watch Lionel closely, to wait for the slip that would betray him. The brooch, she felt, was within reach, hidden in the coat that never left his side. Tomorrow, she would orchestrate a moment to test her theory, perhaps at tea, where the household would gather, and a gentle nudge might provoke the truth. The Silvermere Lake, with its frozen secrets, had given her the clues she needed, and now it was a matter of patience and observation, skills honed in the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead. She rose, her eyes drawn to the window where the lake lay under its snowy shroud. The truth was close, she knew, hidden in the interplay of greed and deception. As the manor settled into another uneasy night, Miss Marple's mind was arcing, ready to unravel the mystery of Silvermere Lake, one careful step at a time. Chapter 10. The Torn Scarf's Tale. The late morning light filtered through the heavy clouds over Silvermere Manor, casting a pallid glow across the snow-covered grounds. The lake, a frozen expanse of secrets, shimmered faintly beyond the manor's windows. Its icy surface, a constant reminder of the mystery that gripped the household. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the conservatory with a cup of tea, felt the threads of the puzzle tightening around her. Lionel's guarded behaviour by the boathouse, the metal buckle from the stilts, and the lingering question of Clara's scarlet scarf had brought her closer to the truth. Yet the full picture remained just out of reach. The scarf, with its clean, deliberate tear, was a nagging detail, suggesting a hand subtler than Lionel's theatrical gambit. Today, she resolved, she would unravel its tale. The conservatory was a haven of warmth, its glass walls framing a view of the snow-laden garden, where roses slept beneath their white blankets. Miss Marple, her knitting bag at her side, had chosen this spot for its quiet, hoping to catch Clara alone. The girl's confession about seeing Lionel with the stilts had been a breakthrough, but her fear and reticence hinted at deeper layers, perhaps complicity, perhaps coercion. The scarf, found snagged in the reeds, was the key, and Miss Marple intended to probe its significance gently, like a needle threading a delicate stitch. Clara entered, her auburn hair loosely pinned, her hands clutching a sketchbook as if it were an anchor. Her green eyes, shadowed with worry, brightened slightly at the sight of Miss Marple. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice soft but tinged with relief. "I didn't expect to find you here. It's so peaceful compared to the rest of the house." She settled into a wicker chair, her sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing of the lake, its lines capturing the eerie stillness of the ice. "It is a lovely spot," Miss Marple agreed, her smile warm, but her eyes sharp. "And a good place for thinking, don't you find? Your sketches are quite remarkable, my dear. You have an eye for detail, an artist's gift. That scarf of yours, for instance, so vivid in the snow. It's curious how it came to be torn, isn't it?" Clara's fingers froze on the sketchbook, and a flush crept up her cheeks. "The scarf," she murmured, her gaze dropping. "I still don't understand it. I didn't notice it was torn until the morning we found it. I thought I'd caught it on a door or a branch, but—" she trailed off, her hands trembling slightly. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice gentle but probing. "In my village, we once had a case where a torn glove was left in a garden to suggest a struggle. It turned out to be deliberate, placed to mislead. Your scarf's tear is so clean, almost as if it were cut with scissors. That's not the work of a careless snag, is it?" Clara's eyes widened, and she shook her head, her voice barely audible. "I don't know, Miss Marple. I swear I didn't leave it there. But when I saw it in the reeds, I was terrified. What if someone's trying to make it look like I'm involved? Or Lionel?" Her voice broke, and she clutched the sketchbook tighter, as if it could shield her from the truth. Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch reassuring. "Fear can cloud the mind, my dear, but it can also sharpen the eye. Tell me, have you looked at your sketches from that day by the lake? Sometimes what we see without thinking finds its way onto the page." Clara hesitated, then opened her sketchbook, flipping to a page dated the afternoon of the Brooch's disappearance. The drawing was a study of the lake, its reeds and ice rendered in delicate pencil strokes. In the background, almost an afterthought, was a figure near the boathouse, tall and slightly blurred, holding what appeared to be long poles. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I didn't realize— I sketched this without thinking. It's Lionel, isn't it? With those poles, stilts you called them. Oh, Miss Marple, what have I done?" "You've done nothing wrong," Miss Marple said firmly. "You've seen what others missed, and that's a gift. This sketch confirms what you told me, but it also raises a question. Why was the scarf placed so deliberately? It's as if someone wanted it found, to point to you or to distract from something else." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I don't want to believe Lionel would do this, but I can't ignore it any more. He's been so secretive, always wearing that coat even indoors. I thought it was just nerves, but now—" She paused, her voice steadying. "I'll help you, Miss Marple. If he's hiding something, we need to know." Miss Marple smiled, her heart warmed by the girl's courage. "That's the spirit, my dear. Keep your eyes open, and don't be afraid to trust your instincts. The truth is close, I feel it." She rose, her mind already turning to the next step. The scarf's tale was unfolding, but its full meaning depended on the brooch, and Lionel's coat, which she was now certain concealed it. The household gathered for luncheon, the dining room's grandeur a stark contrast to the strained atmosphere. Beatrice at the head of the table was subdued, her hands fidgeting with her napkin. Major Reginald, still bristling from his morning outburst, ate with a grim determination, his eyes flicking toward Lionel with undisguised suspicion. Lionel, seated beside Clara, maintained his charm, though Miss Marple noted the way his hand strayed to his coat pocket, a gesture now as familiar as it was telling. Mrs. Tuttle, serving with her quiet efficiency, was a shadow in the background, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The meal was interrupted by a knock at the door, and Mrs. Tuttle admitted the village postman, who handed her a letter for Beatrice. "From the jeweller in St. Mary's Hollow, my lady," she said, passing it over. Beatrice opened it with trembling hands, her face paling as she read. "It's about the brooch," she said, her voice faint. "Mr. Hargreaves says he was approached yesterday by a man inquiring about selling an emerald brooch, but he refused when the man couldn't produce proof of ownership. He thought I should know." The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over them. Reginald slammed his fist on the table, his face red. "I knew it! It's that boy, Lionel, selling off family heirlooms to pay his debts. Who else would dare?" His voice boomed, and Clara flinched, her eyes darting to Lionel. Lionel's smile was tight, his hand gripping his coat pocket. "Major, that's a wild accusation. I've been here, not traipsing to jewellers. Anyone could have inquired. Village gossip travels fast. Perhaps it was a mistake." His tone was calm, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of panic in his eyes, a crack in his polished facade. Beatrice turned to him, her voice trembling. "Lionel, tell me it wasn't you, please." Her eyes were pleading, and Miss Marple saw the pain of betrayal in them, the fear that her nephew had broken her trust. "I swear, Aunt Beatrice," Lionel said, his voice earnest, "I wouldn't do that to you. The brooch is family. It means as much to me as it does to you." But his hand remained in his pocket, and Miss Marple's certainty grew. The brooch was there, hidden in the coat's lining, a bold move that relied on the household's chaos to conceal it. Miss Marple spoke, her voice soft but cutting through the tension. "It's a curious thing, isn't it? How a jewel can stir such trouble. In my village, we had a case where a stolen ring was found in a coat pocket, overlooked because no one thought to look so close to home. Perhaps we should search more thoroughly here, starting with the obvious." Her eyes met Lionel's, and for a moment she saw fear in his gaze, quickly masked by a laugh. "Search my coat?" he said, his tone light but strained. "Miss Marple, you're full of surprises. Go ahead, if it'll put this nonsense to rest." He stood, holding out the coat, but his hand lingered near the pocket, and Miss Marple sensed he was bluffing, counting on her hesitation. Before she could respond, Clara rose, her face pale but resolute. "I'll look," she said, her voice steady, despite her trembling hands. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on Lionel's, and reached for the coat. Lionel's smile faltered, and he took a step back. But Clara was quicker, her fingers finding the inner lining. A gasp escaped her as she pulled out a small glinting object, the emerald brooch, its green stone catching the light. The room erupted. Beatrice cried out, her hands flying to her face. Reginald roared, "I knew it!" and lunged toward Lionel, who stumbled back, his face ashen. Clara, holding the brooch, looked at Lionel with a mix of heartbreak and betrayal. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Miss Marple stepped forward, her presence calming the chaos. "There now," she said, her voice firm. "Let's not lose our heads. The brooch is found, and that's a start." "But the story isn't finished, is it, Mr. Haverford?" Her eyes were sharp, and Lionel, cornered, slumped into a chair, his charm finally deserting him. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said, his voice low. "I needed the money just to tide me over. I was going to return it, I swear." His words were feeble, and Miss Marple saw the lie in them, the desperation of a man caught in his own trap. Beatrice, tears in her eyes, took the brooch from Clara, clutching it to her chest. "Oh, Lionel, why? You could have come to me. We're family." Her voice was a mix of sorrow and disbelief, and Miss Marple felt a pang of sympathy for her friend, whose trust had been so deeply wounded. But the scarf, Miss Marple thought, was still unexplained. Its clean tear, its placement in the reeds, suggested a second hand, someone who knew of Lionel's plan or sought to exploit it. She turned to Clara, who stood frozen, the sketchbook still in her hand. "Miss Thornton," she said gently, "your sketch was most helpful, but the scarf, did you tear it yourself, perhaps to protect someone?" Clara shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, I swear. I didn't even know it was torn until we found it. Someone must have taken it from my room, or—" She paused, her gaze shifting to Mrs. Tuttle, who had been watching silently from the sideboard. Miss Marple followed her gaze, her mind racing. Mrs. Tuttle's presence by the lake, her pointed remarks about the stilts, her quiet watchfulness, all suggested a role beyond that of a loyal housekeeper. "Mrs. Tuttle," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but commanding, "you've been very observant, haven't you? Perhaps you saw more than you've let on, about the scarf or the lake." Mrs. Tuttle's expression remained impassive, but her hands tightened on the tray she held. "I see what needs seeing, ma'am," she said, her voice steady. "The scarf was in the laundry, torn, so I thought it no matter. I didn't know it was important until it turned up by the lake." Her words were careful, but Miss Marple sensed a deflection, a truth half told. The room was silent, the weight of the brooch's discovery settling over them. Lionel, defeated, said nothing, his eyes fixed on the floor. Clara, her courage spent, sank into her chair, the sketchbook falling open to reveal the damning sketch. Beatrice, clutching the brooch, looked at Miss Marple with gratitude and sorrow. "Jane, what would we have done without you?" she said, her voice trembling. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes still on Mrs. Tuttle. "The truth has a way of coming out, Beatrice, but the scarf's tale isn't finished, and I suspect there's more to learn. Let's keep our eyes open, shall we?" Her words were gentle, but her mind was alert, piecing together the final threads of the mystery. The lake, the stilts, the brooch, all were in place, but the scarf's clean tear hinted at a final twist, one she would unravel before her time at Silvermere was done. Chapter 11. The Brooch Revealed. The afternoon tea at Silvermere Manor was a ritual steeped in tradition. Yet today it carried an undercurrent of tension as palpable as the snow piling against the windows. The drawing room, with its heavy drapes and polished mahogany, was warmed by a crackling fire, but the glow did little to thaw the chill of suspicion that lingered among the Haverfords. Miss Jane Marple, seated near the hearth with her knitting in her lap, observed the gathering with her usual quiet attentiveness. The discovery of the emerald brooch in Lionel's coat at luncheon had been a dramatic revelation, yet the mystery was not fully resolved. The torn scarf, with its deliberate placement in the reeds, suggested a deeper layer, and Miss Marple was determined to unravel it before the day's end. Lady Beatrice Haverford, at the centre of the gathering, held the recovered brooch in her hands, its green stone catching the firelight like a captured star. Her face, though relieved, bore the marks of betrayal, her eyes red from unshed tears. Lionel, seated across from her, was subdued, his usual charm replaced by a weary resignation. His heavy coat, now draped over a chair, seemed to mock his earlier bravado, its empty pocket a silent confession. Clara Thornton, pale and silent, sat beside him. Her sketchbook closed on her lap, her fingers twisting nervously. Major Reginald Haverford, his moustache bristling, occupied an armchair near the window, his posture rigid with indignation. Mrs. Tuttle, ever the efficient housekeeper, moved about with a tray of scones and tea, her sharp eyes catching every glance and gesture. The room was silent, save for the clink of porcelain and the soft hiss of the fire. Beatrice, clutching the brooch, broke the quiet, her voice trembling but resolute. "Jane, I cannot thank you enough," she said, her eyes meeting Miss Marple's. "To have this back, to know it wasn't lost forever, it means more than I can say. But how did you know? How did you know it was in Lionel's coat?" Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her smile gentle, but her eyes sharp. "It was a matter of observation, Beatrice, and a touch of experience. In my village, St. Mary Mead, we once had a case where a stolen locket was hidden in a gentleman's waistcoat, overlooked because no one thought to look so close to home. Mr. Haverford's coat, worn even in the warmth of the dining room, suggested he was guarding something, and the lake, with its curious footprints, pointed to a plan more elaborate than a simple theft." Lionel shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly. "I've already admitted it, Aunt Beatrice," he said, his voice low. "I took the brooch, thinking I could sell it to clear my debts. I meant to replace it before anyone noticed. It was foolish, I know." His eyes flicked to Clara, seeking forgiveness, but her gaze remained fixed on her hands, her expression one of quiet heartbreak. Reginald snorted, his voice booming across the room. "Foolish? It's a disgrace, that's what it is. Stealing from your own family, skulking about with tricks like some circus performer. Those footprints on the lake. Your doing, I presume." His accusation was sharp, and the room held its breath, waiting for Lionel's response. Miss Marple raised a hand, her gesture calming the rising storm. "Let us be clear, Major," she said, her voice steady. "The footprints were indeed a clever trick, made possible by stilts, which allowed the walker to retreat without leaving return tracks. But the why of it is as important as the how. Mr. Haverford, perhaps you could tell us, why go to such lengths? A simple theft would have been easier, surely." Lionel's shoulders slumped, and he ran a hand through his dark hair. "It was a diversion," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I knew Aunt Beatrice would notice the brooch missing, and I needed time to sell it. The footprints were meant to make everyone think it was lost on the lake, or taken by some stranger. I used the stilts from the attic, walked out to the middle, and came back through the snow without leaving more tracks. I thought it would keep everyone guessing." He paused, his eyes darting to Clara. I didn't mean for anyone else to be blamed. Clara's head snapped up, her green eyes blazing. "But my scarf, Lionel! It was found in the reeds, torn, as if I'd been there. Did you do that? Did you try to make it look like I was involved?" Her voice trembled with a mix of anger and betrayal, and Miss Marple noted the way her hands clenched, as if restraining a deeper hurt. Lionel's face paled, and he shook his head vehemently. "No, Clara, I swear. I didn't touch your scarf. I don't know how it got there. I would never—" He stopped, his words faltering under her gaze, and Miss Marple saw the doubt in his eyes, as if he himself were unsure of the truth. Beatrice, clutching the brooch, looked from Lionel to Clara, her expression one of anguish. "Oh, Clara, I never thought you were involved. But the scarf, it's so confusing. Jane, what does it mean? If Lionel didn't place it there, who did?" Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice calm but commanding attention. "That, Beatrice, is the heart of the matter. The scarf's tear is too clean, too deliberate to be an accident. It was placed in the reeds to be found, to point suspicion at Miss Thornton, or to muddy the waters of Mr. Haverford's plan. Someone else in this household knew of the theft or suspected it, and sought to complicate the narrative." Her eyes swept the room, lingering briefly on Mrs. Tuttle, who stood motionless by the tea-tray, her face impassive, but her eyes alert. Reginald, his face red, pounded his fist on the arm of his chair. "Complicate the narrative? This is no novel, Miss Marple. Someone's playing a dirty game, and I'll wager it's still Lionel, covering his tracks with more lies. Or perhaps that housekeeper knows more than she's letting on." He glared at Mrs. Tuttle, who met his gaze with a cool composure. "Major," Miss Marple said, her tone mild but firm, "it's easy to accuse, but harder to prove. In my village, we once had a case where a stolen silver spoon was blamed on a maid, only to be found in a guest's valise, placed there to deflect suspicion. The scarf suggests a similar intent, a second hand perhaps working with Mr. Haverford, or against him." She turned to Lionel, her eyes piercing. "Mr. Haverford, you say you didn't touch the scarf, but did you tell anyone of your plan? Someone who might have used it to their own ends?" Lionel shook his head, his expression one of genuine confusion. "No one. I kept it to myself. I knew it was wrong, but I was desperate. My creditors, they're not patient men." His voice cracked, and for the first time, Miss Marple saw a flicker of sincerity. A young man caught in a trap of his own making. Clara, her resolve wavering, reached out to touch his hand, then drew back, her eyes filled with doubt. "Lionel, I want to believe you," she said softly. "But the scarf, the stilts, it's all so calculated. If you didn't place it there, who did?" Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Mrs. Tuttle, who had been silent throughout the exchange. The housekeeper's presence, always unobtrusive yet ever present, had been a constant in this drama. Her late-night wanderings by the lake, her pointed remark about the stilts, and her calm deflection when questioned, all suggested a deeper knowledge. "Mrs. Tuttle," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but insistent, "you've been with the family many years. You see things others miss, don't you? Perhaps you saw something about the scarf, or the lake, that you haven't shared." Mrs. Tuttle's hands tightened on the tea-tray, but her face remained composed. "I see what needs seeing, ma'am," she said, echoing her earlier words. "The scarf was in the laundry, torn as I said. I thought it unimportant until it was found by the lake. If someone took it from Miss Thornton's room, it wasn't me." Her tone was steady, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance toward Lionel, as if gauging his reaction. Beatrice, still clutching the brooch, looked at Mrs. Tuttle with a mix of hope and suspicion. "Mrs. Tuttle, you've always been loyal. If you know anything, please tell us. This family can't bear more secrets." The housekeeper hesitated, her eyes flickering to the floor, then back to Beatrice. "I know nothing for certain, my lady," she said, "but I did see Miss Thornton's scarf in the hall the day before it was found. It was on a chair, not torn. I put it in her room, thinking she'd left it by mistake. The next day it was gone." Her words were careful, but Miss Marple sensed a truth in them, a piece of the puzzle falling into place. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Then someone took it from my room. But who? And why?" Her eyes darted to Lionel, then away, as if afraid of what she might see. Miss Marple leaned back, her mind racing. The scarf's journey from Clara's room to the Reeds suggested a deliberate act, someone who knew of Lionel's plan or suspected it. Mrs. Tuttle's account, if true, narrowed the field. The scarf had been taken after it was returned to Clara's room, torn and placed to implicate her. Lionel, caught with the brooch, had no reason to frame his fiancée, unless it was a desperate bid to shift suspicion. But the clean tear, the careful placement, pointed to a subtler mind, someone who understood the household's dynamics and sought to exploit them. "Someone wanted to complicate Mr. Haverford's plan," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but resonant. "The footprints were his doing, a diversion to hide the theft, but the scarf was another's work, meant to cast doubt on Miss Thornton, or to ensure the mystery deepened. In my village, we had a case where a torn letter was left to implicate an innocent, but it was the one who placed it who betrayed themselves, by knowing too much." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. Lionel, defeated, stared at the floor, his confession weighing heavily. Clara, her courage faltering, clutched her sketchbook, the damning sketch a silent witness. Beatrice, holding the brooch, looked from one to the other, her heart torn between love and betrayal. Reginald, his anger spent, sat in sullen silence, his accusations proven but his triumph hollow. And Mrs. Tuttle, standing by the tea-tray, met Miss Marple's gaze with a calm that bordered on defiance. "The scarf's tale is nearly told," Miss Marple continued, "but one piece remains. Mrs. Tuttle, you've been very careful in what you say, but your presence by the lake last night, your mention of the stilts, they suggest you know more than you've admitted. Did you see someone take the scarf, or perhaps place it in the reeds?" Mrs. Tuttle's composure wavered, her hands tightening on the tray. "I saw nothing, ma'am," she said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying a flicker of unease. "I only know what I've told you. The scarf was in the hall, then in Miss Thornton's room, then gone. I've no part in this." Her words were firm, but Miss Marple sensed a half-truth, a secret held back. Beatrice, her voice soft, spoke up. "Mrs. Tuttle, if you know anything, please, for the sake of Silvermere, tell us." Her plea was heartfelt, and Miss Marple saw the housekeeper's resolve waver, her loyalty to Beatrice warring with her silence. Before Mrs. Tuttle could respond, Lionel stood, his face pale but resolute. "Enough," he said, his voice breaking. "I took the brooch, and I used the stilts, but the scarf, I didn't touch it. If someone placed it there, it was to make me look worse, or to protect me by blaming Clara. I don't know who, but I swear it wasn't me." His eyes met Clara's, and for a moment Miss Marple saw a spark of the man she loved, flawed but desperate for redemption. The room was silent, the fire's crackle the only sound. Miss Marple knew the truth was close, but the scarf's final secret remained. Mrs. Tuttle, she suspected, held the key, her silence a shield for someone, or something she valued more than truth. As the tea grew cold and the snow fell outside, Miss Marple resolved to watch and wait, her quiet presence a trap for the unwary. The brooch was found, but the mystery of Silvermere Lake was not yet complete, and she would not rest until its final thread was unravelled. Chapter 12. The Final Thread. The drawing-room at Silvermere Manor was steeped in the soft glow of lamplight, the fire casting long shadows across the polished wood and heavy drapes. The snow outside had resumed its relentless fall, muffling the world beyond and lending the room an air of isolation, as if the manor were a ship adrift in a sea of white. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her usual armchair with her knitting in her lap, felt the weight of the mystery pressing closer to its resolution. The recovery of the emerald brooch from Lionel Haverford's coat had been a triumph, yet the torn scarlet scarf, its clean tear and deliberate placement in the reeds, remained an unresolved thread, pointing to a second hand in this intricate drama. Tonight, she resolved, she would weave the final threads together, revealing the full tapestry of deceit that had enveloped Silvermere. Lady Beatrice Haverford, at the centre of the gathering, clutched the brooch, its green stone a quiet reminder of the family's fractured trust. Her face, though relieved at its return, was etched with sorrow, her silver hair framing eyes that flickered between hope and despair. Lionel, seated across from her, was a shadow of his former self, his charm extinguished by the weight of his confession. Clara Thornton, beside him, held her sketchbook tightly, her pale face a mask of conflicting emotions. Love for Lionel, warring with the sting of his betrayal. Major Reginald Haverford, in his armchair by the window, glowered silently, his earlier bluster replaced by a sullen resentment, as if the brooch's recovery had robbed him of his righteous indignation. Mrs. Tuttle, the housekeeper, moved about with her usual efficiency, setting out a tray of sherry and biscuits, her sharp eyes catching every nuance of the room's tension. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the faint rattle of the windows against the wind. Beatrice, her voice trembling, spoke first, addressing Miss Marple. "Jane, you've given me back my mother's brooch, and for that I'm eternally grateful. But this business with the scarf, it haunts me. Why Clara's scarf? Why the lake? I feel as if there's more to this than Lionel's folly." Her eyes searched Miss Marple's, seeking answers to the unease that lingered. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her expression one of gentle reassurance. "You're quite right, Beatrice. The brooch is found, and Mr. Haverford has owned his part in its theft. But the scarf, with its deliberate tear, tells another story. A story of someone who knew of his plan or suspected it, and sought to shape its outcome. In my village, St. Mary Mead, we once had a case where a torn handkerchief was left to implicate an innocent, but it was the one who placed it who revealed their own guilt. We must look closely at those who see more than they say." Her words hung in the air, and she noted the reactions around her. Lionel's head remained bowed, his hands clasped tightly, as if bracing for further revelations. Clara's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her face, though her grip on the sketchbook suggested a resolve to face the truth. Reginald shifted uncomfortably, his moustache twitching, but he said nothing, his earlier accusations spent. Mrs. Tuttle, pausing with the sherry tray, met Miss Marple's gaze with a calm that bordered on defiance, her face betraying no emotion beyond her usual composure. Miss Marple continued, her voice soft but commanding attention. The footprints on the lake, made with stilts, were Mr. Haverford's creation, a clever diversion to suggest the brooch was lost or stolen by an outsider. But the scarf, torn and placed so carefully in the reeds, was not his doing. He had no reason to implicate Miss Thornton, whom he loves, nor to complicate his own plan with such a flourish. Someone else took the scarf, tore it, and placed it to be found, either to cast suspicion on Miss Thornton or to ensure the mystery deepened. Clara's voice broke the silence, trembling but firm. "It wasn't me, Miss Marple. I swear it. I didn't even know my scarf was torn until we found it. Someone must have taken it from my room, but I don't know who or why." Her eyes darted to Lionel, then to Mrs. Tuttle, as if seeking the culprit among them. Lionel looked up, his face pale but resolute. "I've told you everything, Clara. I took the brooch, used the stilts, made the footprints, but the scarf, I didn't touch it. I wouldn't do that to you." His voice cracked, and for a moment Miss Marple saw a spark of sincerity, a man caught in his own web, but desperate to protect the one he loved. Reginald snorted, his voice cutting through the tension. "A likely story, boy. You're up to your neck in trouble, and now you're spinning tales to save yourself. The scarf's just another of your tricks, I'll wager." His accusation was sharp, but Miss Marple noted a lack of conviction, as if he sensed the puzzle was more complex than his bluster allowed. Beatrice, her hands tightening around the brooch, turned to Miss Marple. "Jane, please, if there's more to this, we must know. Who would do such a thing, and why? I can't bear this suspicion among us." Her voice was a plea, and Miss Marple felt a pang of sympathy for her friend, whose faith in her family had been so sorely tested. Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes sweeping the room. The scarf's placement was no accident, she said. It was taken from Miss Thornton's room, torn with care, and placed in the reeds to be found. This suggests someone with access to her belongings, someone who knew of Mr. Haverford's plan or suspected it, and someone who wished to shape the narrative. Let us consider the household. Mr. Haverford, caught with the brooch, had no motive to complicate his theft with the scarf. Miss Thornton, as the victim of its placement, is unlikely to have torn it herself. Major Reginald, your suspicions have been vocal, but such a subtle act seems beyond your temperament, which leaves her gaze settled on Mrs. Tuttle, who stood motionless by the tray, her face a mask of calm. Mrs. Tuttle's hands tightened briefly, but her voice was steady. "Ma'am, I've told you what I know. The scarf was in the hall, then in Miss Thornton's room, then gone. I had no part in its placement." Her words were measured, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance toward Beatrice. A flicker of something, guilt perhaps, or fear. Miss Marple tilted her head, her smile gentle but probing. "Mrs. Tuttle, you've been with Silvermere for 20 years. A loyal guardian of its secrets, you see everything. The comings and goings, the tensions, the truths hidden behind smiles. Your mention of the stilts was most helpful. But it was also deliberate, wasn't it? And your presence by the lake last night, under the guise of retrieving a glove, suggests you know more than you've shared. Did you take the scarf, perhaps to protect someone, or to expose another? The room was silent, the fire's crackle the only sound. Mrs. Tuttle's composure wavered, her eyes darting to Beatrice, then to the floor. "I meant no harm, my lady," she said, her voice low but clear. "I saw Master Lionel in the boathouse that afternoon, with the stilts, acting secretive. I suspected he was up to something, though I didn't know what. The scarf was in the hall, as I said, and I put it in Miss Thornton's room. Later, I noticed it was gone, and when it turned up in the reeds torn, I thought perhaps I'd made a mistake, leaving it where someone could take it." Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Mrs. Tuttle, you suspected Lionel and said nothing. Why? You've always been loyal to me." Her voice was a mix of hurt and disbelief, and Miss Marple saw the housekeeper's resolve crumble. "I was loyal, my lady," Mrs. Tuttle said, her voice breaking. "But I've known Master Lionel since he was a boy, always full of dreams, even if they went wrong. I didn't want to believe he'd steal from you. But when I saw him with the stilts, I feared the worst. I took the scarf from Miss Thornton's room, tore it, and placed it in the reeds. I thought if suspicion fell on Miss Thornton, it might force Master Lionel to confess, to stop before he went too far. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, only to protect you, my lady, from more pain." Clara's eyes widened, her sketchbook slipping to the floor. "You did that to me, to make Lionel confess, but I could have been blamed." Her voice trembled with a mix of anger and relief, and Miss Marple reached out to steady her, her touch calming. Lionel stood, his face ashen. "Mrs. Tuttle, you thought I'd let Clara take the blame. I'd never do that. I was going to return the brooch, I swear." His words were desperate, but Miss Marple saw the truth in them. A man caught in his own folly, undone by those who sought to save him. Beatrice, tears streaming down her face, clutched the brooch tighter. "Oh, Mrs. Tuttle, how could you? And Lionel, my own nephew, this house is breaking my heart." Her voice was a whisper, and Miss Marple felt a surge of sympathy for her friend, whose trust had been shattered by those closest to her. Miss Marple rose, her small figure commanding the room. "There now, Beatrice, the truth is out, and that's a start." Mr. Haverford took the brooch, driven by desperation, and used the stilts to create a mystery. Mrs. Tuttle, in her misguided loyalty, placed the scarf to force his hand, hoping to protect you from further betrayal. It's a sad tale, but not an uncommon one. In my village, I've seen families torn apart by secrets, only to mend when the truth is faced. Reginald, his anger deflated, muttered, "Well, that's that then." A fine mess, all of it. His voice lacked its usual force, and Miss Marple noted a grudging respect in his eyes, as if he recognized her quiet authority. Clara, her courage returning, turned to Lionel. "I love you," she said softly, "but you've hurt us all. We'll need time, Lionel, to rebuild trust." Her words were firm, and Miss Marple saw a strength in her, an artist's clarity that would guide her through the pain. Beatrice, wiping her tears, looked at Miss Marple. "Jane, what would we have done without you? You've seen through it all, the lake, the scarf, the stilts. I don't know how to thank you." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "No thanks are needed, Beatrice. The truth has a way of coming out, Like a stitch that completes a pattern, Silvermere will heal in time if you face it together. Her gaze lingered on Mrs. Tuttle, who stood silently, her head bowed. And perhaps, Mrs. Tuttle, you'll find a way to make amends with honesty rather than secrets. As the household dispersed, the fire burning low, Miss Marple sat by the window. Her knitting resumed. The lake, under its snowy shroud, was at peace, its secrets laid bare. The brooch was returned, the scarf's tale told, and the family, though bruised, would mend. In the quiet of St. Mary Mead, she had seen such dramas unfold. And here at Silvermere, the human heart was no different, flawed, fragile, but capable of redemption. The snow fell softly outside, and Miss Marple, her work done, felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing the final thread had been woven into place.